Paradise Revealed. Volume 2. The Path to Pure Devotion Through Milton's Paradise Regained. Shivani Dewan. Introduction. We've all felt lost at some point, trapped by our own desires, confused about our purpose, disconnected from something greater than ourselves. This feeling isn't new. It's the human condition, and it's exactly where our journey begins. First volume of Paradise Revealed explored how we fell into this predicament. It examined how the pursuit of independence from the divine, the desire to be our own gods, led to suffering, confusion, and a sense of separation from our true nature. We saw how uncontrolled desires create a cycle of misery that seems impossible to escape. But what if there's a way out? What if the path to freedom has already been demonstrated? Perfect example. This volume follows Milton's promise to tell the story of how paradise was recovered by one man's firm obedience, fully tried through all temptation, and the tempter foiled. This isn't just an ancient poem, it's a blueprint for spiritual liberation. At the heart of this volume is the Son of God, the one greater man, who shows us the way forward. His experience in the wilderness isn't merely a historical or mythological event, it's the ultimate demonstration of how consciousness can overcome conditioning. While most of us are driven by impulses we barely understand, the Son shows what it means to align completely with a higher purpose. Think of him as the ultimate spiritual scientist, running an experiment in consciousness under the most extreme conditions. The laboratory is a desolate wilderness. The hypothesis, that unwavering devotion and self-mastery can overcome any temptation. The result, a proven method for spiritual freedom. The real battle. Here's the key insight. The greatest battles aren't fought with swords or words, they're fought in consciousness itself. The Son's journey reveals how temptation works in layers, attacking us at increasingly subtle levels. Level 1, the body. First come the basic drives: hunger, comfort, physical pleasure. The Bhagavad Gita, an ancient Indian spiritual text, calls desire the greatest enemy, the destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. We've all experienced this. One craving leads to another, and soon we're controlled by appetites we can't satisfy. The Son shows us how to master these drives rather than being mastered by them. Level 2, the mind. Once physical temptations are conquered, subtler lures emerge: power, prestige, intellectual pride. Imagine being offered kingdoms, influence, the chance to change the world on your terms. The temptation here isn't obviously bad. It's the seductive idea that you know best, that your wisdom is supreme. The Son demonstrates that true wisdom comes from humility and connection to authentic spiritual knowledge, not from clever philosophy or political genius. Level 3, the false self. The deepest temptation is the hardest to see, the illusion that we're separate, independent beings who must prove our worth. This is what the Gita calls false ego, the mistaken identity that keeps us trapped. Victory here means recognizing our true nature and surrendering the exhausting project of self-aggrandizement. Path within. The ultimate message of Paradise Regained challenges everything modern culture tells us. True fulfillment doesn't come from asserting independence, accumulating power, or proving ourselves. Comes from internal mastery, from aligning our will with something greater, from achieving what Milton calls the paradise within thee, happier far. This isn't about blind obedience or losing yourself. It's about finding yourself by letting go of the false self, the one driven by endless, unsatisfiable desires. It's about discovering that the freedom you're seeking isn't found in doing whatever you want, but in wanting what truly serves your highest nature. For newcomers to spiritual literature, think of it this way: you're not broken and you don't need fixing. You need to remember. You need to reconnect with something you already are but have forgotten. The Son's journey shows you how. For experienced seekers and those with scientific minds, consider this an empirical study of consciousness under pressure. What happens when a fully awakened being faces the same temptations that trap ordinary humans? What techniques does he employ? What can we learn from his methodology? How this book fits together. This volume continues seamlessly from where Paradise Revealed left off. To maintain the flow of ideas, Volume 1 examined divine authority, the nature of evil, cosmic creation, and the fall, ending with the promise of a paradise within in Chapter 5. Volume 2 picks up immediately with Chapter 6. Its structure mirrors Milton's four-book Paradise Regained. Chapter 6, Book I, The Foundation of Spiritual Combat. Chapter 7, Book 2, Conquering Physical Temptations. Chapter 8, Book 3, Rejecting False Wisdom and Pride. Chapter 9, Book 4, The Final Victory and Internal Paradise. This continuous numbering reinforces a crucial point: spiritual development follows a logical progression. Just as the Bhagavad Gita builds from basic concepts to advanced wisdom across its 18 chapters, this trilogy moves from understanding the problem, the fall, to applying the solution, redemption through devotion, to realizing the ultimate truth, which we'll explore in the final volume. You're not reading disconnected essays. You're following a single path, marked out by guides who've walked it before you. The question is, are you ready to take the next step? Chapter 6. Perfect Servant. To those who are constantly devoted and who worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. Bhagavad Gita 10:10. The first part of our epic, Paradise Revealed, detailed the catastrophic results of our disobedience. The fall established the material universe as a temporary and inherently vulnerable reality, a theme we explored where the miseries were confirmed as the inescapable consequence of unregulated desire and the pursuit of illusory independence. Now we turn to the second and redemptive narrative, inspired by Milton's promise to sing of paradise recovered. By one man's firm obedience fully tried through all temptation, and the tempter foiled. This second narrative, following the structure of Paradise Regained, reveals the definitive path to liberation, the recovery of the eternal spiritual state through unwavering adherence to divine will. The Son of God, the one greater man, embodies the perfect model for the conditioned soul seeking freedom from the material whirlpool. His struggle in the wilderness is interpreted here as the perfect demonstration of devoted service, contrasting his fixed spiritual conviction against the wiles of the tempter. My father, during a late evening discussion under the stars, once remarked, "Son, this is the soul's reset button, where obedience rewrites the script of the fall." This chapter, guided by his wisdom and the Gita's teachings, explores how the son's obedience reclaims the soul's identity, setting a blueprint for Paradise Regained. The fundamental principle governing this redemption is encapsulated in our chapter motto. This sacred instruction establishes the essence of pure action. The living entity is merely an instrument in the divine plan, whose success is guaranteed not by personal power, but by acting under superior direction. The victory achieved by the Son, therefore, is rooted entirely in his perfect submission and realization of his eternal role as the supreme servant, a lesson resonant with today's leaders who find strength in delegation rather than domination. Transition to the greater man. The stage for this monumental trial is the waste wilderness. The narrative opens with the Spirit leading the Son, the glorious eremite, into the desert. This exposure to Satan is ordained by the Almighty Father, who intends to expose to Satan, let him tempt and now essay his utmost subtlety. This is not a reluctant duty, but a conscious, deliberate entry into the field where the ultimate warfare, spiritual combat waged through consciousness, will be undertaken. The wilderness setting itself carries profound symbolic meaning. Unlike the lush Garden of Eden where Adam and Eve faced their trial amid abundance and comfort, the Son's testing ground is austere, stripped of material conveniences and distractions. This barren landscape represents the spiritual seeker's need to transcend dependence on external circumstances for inner peace and strength. The wilderness becomes a crucible where the soul's true nature can emerge, unencumbered by material attachments. Satan's envy and false ego. Satan, the archenemy and artificer of fraud, immediately recognizes that this engagement represents a far other labor than the easy corruption of Adam. He is driven by overwhelming pride and envy, refusing to accept the hierarchy of heaven. His entire rebellion was based on the premise that he and his cohorts were God's equals, if in power and splendor less, in freedom equal. This refusal to accept the reality of the supreme controller is the very hallmark of the demonic mentality, a theme echoed in modern corporate environments where leaders reject oversight and accountability. This persistent delusion is the spiritual error defined in the Gita as false self-identification. It compels the conditioned soul to forget his eternal relationship with the divine, causing him to think, "I am the Lord of everything, I am the enjoyer, I am perfect, powerful, and happy. There is none so powerful and happy as I am." This ambition finds joy only in misery and leads the demonic to disregard all authority. Satan, in his defiance, attempts to reascend self-raised, but divine authority is absolute and inherent. The psychology of Satan's rebellion reveals universal patterns that manifest in human relationships, organizations, and societies. When individuals or groups reject legitimate authority based on pride or envy, they create chaos and suffering for themselves and others. This principle applies equally to family dynamics where children rebel against loving parental guidance, workplace situations where employees undermine effective leadership, or political contexts where citizens reject laws that serve the common good. Modern psychology recognizes similar patterns in narcissistic personality disorders, where individuals maintain grandiose self-images while being unable to accept criticism or acknowledge the legitimacy of external authority. The therapeutic challenge lies in helping such individuals recognize their interdependence with others and their need for humility and cooperation. Constitutional position of the soul. The sun's presence in the wilderness, ready to submit to trial, directly demonstrates the constitutional position of the living soul. The Gita defines the subject matters of knowledge as including the supreme controller and the controlled living entities. The souls are subordinate under all circumstances, and their eternal natural function is to serve the divine. My father often likened this to a musician in an orchestra. Each note serves the conductor's vision, not its own tune. This analogy illuminates a crucial spiritual principle. Individual fulfillment comes through harmonious participation in a greater purpose, not through assertion of independence. Just as a violin achieves its highest expression when played skillfully within a symphony, the individual soul finds its greatest joy and meaning through conscious cooperation with divine will. The sun perfectly embodies this role. Unlike Satan, whose actions spring from the delusion of independent sovereignty, the sun acts based on authority derived from heaven. This obedience aligns him with his true nature, fulfilling the function that Abdil championed in Paradise Lost. Serving God is not servitude, but aligning oneself with nature's command, especially when the ruler is worthiest and excels them whom he governs. The sun thus establishes that the greatest glory lies in perfectly executing the divine will, not in self-aggrandizement, a principle relevant to today's volunteers who find purpose in serving communities. This understanding challenges contemporary cultural narratives that equate freedom with independence and self-assertion. True spiritual freedom, as demonstrated by the sun, comes through conscious alignment with divine purpose rather than rebellion against it. This paradox appears throughout spiritual traditions. We find ourselves by losing ourselves, we become free by accepting appropriate guidance, we discover our unique gifts by serving something greater than our narrow self-interests. Upon entering the desert, the sun is described as musing and much revolving in his breast how best the mighty work he might begin of Savior to mankind. This state of profound, fixed contemplation is the spiritual mastery that protects him from the approaching turmoil. Achieving deep focus. This resolute concentration is the state of steadfast consciousness. The Gita emphasizes that the steady focus of the mind upon the divine or devoted awareness is the highest form of spiritual practice. This is the process of transcending the darkness born of ignorance and attaining a transcendental state of focus. A person in this state, the introspective sage, is always indifferent to materialistic happiness and distress. He remains alert in the night of materialistic people, knowing that academic knowledge, scholarship, or high position are useless in solving the problems of life. This steadiness is the quality that makes an individual eligible for liberation. My father, during a family retreat, shared a story. I once saw a monk meditate through a storm, unmoved like the sun. That steadfastness, a shield against chaos. In today's world, this mirrors mindfulness practitioners who find calm amid digital overload, a practice gaining traction in corporate wellness programs. Cultivation of steadfast consciousness requires understanding the difference between concentration and fixation. Concentration is flexible and responsive, like a skilled driver navigating traffic, fully alert and engaged while maintaining inner calm. Fixation, by contrast, is rigid and brittle, creating tension and eventual breakdown. The sun's contemplation represents true spiritual concentration, deeply focused yet peacefully receptive to divine guidance. Modern neuroscience validates ancient teachings about the benefits of sustained contemplative practice. Regular meditation literally rewires the brain, strengthening areas associated with attention regulation, emotional balance, and self-awareness while reducing activity in regions linked to anxiety and reactive thinking. These changes support the kind of inner stability that the sun demonstrates throughout his trials. Contrast with Arjuna's confusion. The sun's immediate focus stands in stark contrast to Arjuna's initial state on the battlefield. Despite Arjuna's superior academic knowledge of morality and religion, Arjuna was overwhelmed by material grief, lamenting, "I am now unable to stand here any longer. I am forgetting myself, and my mind is reeling." He felt his grief was drying up my senses, prompting him to seek definitive guidance because his own intellect was confused by varied instructions. Arjuna's ultimate solution was to take the divine as his spiritual guide, surrendering his confusion. "Now I am confused about my duty and have lost all composure because of weakness. In this condition, I am asking you to tell me clearly what is best for me. Now I am your disciple and a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me." This marks his transition from confusion to steadfastness, a path the sun exemplifies from the outset. The Gita warns that philosophy without devotion, such as impersonal speculation, is not advisable and leads to confusion. The sun skips these preliminary stages and operates directly on the spiritual platform, having achieved fixed determination for realization, a model for modern seekers bypassing shallow self-help trends. Arjuna's initial bewilderment illustrates a universal human experience, the gap between intellectual understanding and practical wisdom. Many people possess extensive theoretical knowledge about ethics, relationships, or life purpose, yet find themselves paralyzed when facing actual decisions. Transition from knowing about something to knowing it experientially requires the kind of surrendered seeking that Arjuna demonstrates and the sun embodies. This distinction becomes crucial for contemporary spiritual seekers who often mistake information for transformation. Reading spiritual books, attending workshops, or accumulating techniques cannot substitute for the deep inner work of surrender and devoted practice that generates genuine spiritual stability. The sun's decision to endure the temptation, understanding it as a just trial, establishes the principle that true freedom lies in harmonizing with the divine will, not asserting illusory independence. True renunciation versus pretense. The sun confirms that true leadership is earned. "Suffer best can do, best reign who first well hath obeyed." This defines genuine spiritual action. The divine confirms that true renunciation is defined as one who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as he is obligated is in the renounced order of life, and he is the true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no work. My father once compared this to a soldier. He fights not for glory but duty. True renunciation is action with purpose. This teaching directly challenges popular misconceptions about spiritual renunciation. Many people imagine that spiritual life requires abandoning all worldly activities and responsibilities, retreating from society to pursue exclusively contemplative practices. While such paths may be appropriate for certain individuals with specific callings, the Gita teaches that most people achieve spiritual realization through dedicated performance of their natural duties with proper consciousness. Key distinction lies not in the external activities themselves but in the internal motivation and awareness that guide them. Parent caring for children with loving attention to their well-being engages in spiritual practice. A teacher instructing students with genuine concern for their development serves the divine through education. A physician treating patients with compassion and skill participates in healing that transcends the merely physical. Arjuna initially wanted to avoid ghastly warfare and retire from active life under the guise of renunciation. The divine firmly rejects this idea, explaining that abruptly adopting the renounced order without purification of heart is simply a disturbance to the social order. The divine did not want Arjuna to become a pretender. So-called renunciation for personal maintenance is never approved. The son's active participation in the trial, therefore, is the perfect example of acting in devoted awareness, performing obligatory duties without attachment to results. This resonates with modern activists who serve causes without seeking personal gain, healthcare workers who treat patients without expectation of recognition, or teachers who educate students motivated by genuine care rather than career advancement. Prescribed duty. Principle of obedience necessitates adhering to one's prescribed responsibilities. The instruction states that it is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though they may be faulty, than another's duties. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. This teaching addresses a common tendency among spiritual seekers to abandon their natural responsibilities in favor of imitating others whose paths appear more glamorous or spiritually advanced. The computer programmer who abandons his family to become a wandering monk may be avoiding his actual spiritual work, which might involve learning patience and service through family relationships while developing technical skills that serve society. The Son, in his role as the Messiah, fully accepts the mission prescribed by the Father, regardless of the difficulty. His commitment is absolute, unlike those in the material world who perform actions out of fear or because they consider them burdensome, which is classified as renunciation driven by passion, leading only to a miserable result. The Son's faithful obedience confirms the soul's role, acting under the orders of the Master and following the teachings faithfully without envy, a principle seen in ethical professionals who stay true to their calling. Contemporary applications of this principle include physicians who maintain medical ethics despite financial pressures, journalists who report truthfully despite political consequences, or parents who provide consistent guidance and support even when children are ungrateful or rebellious. Such individuals demonstrate the Son's example of faithful duty performance regardless of immediate results or recognition. Core concept that sanctifies the Son's obedience and guarantees his victory is the realization that he is acting solely as the divine's instrument. His mission fulfills the purposed counsel preordained and fixed of the Most High. The role of the instrument. Our chosen motto directly addresses this concept. The divine tells Arjuna that the enemies are already put to death by my arrangement and you can be but an instrument in the fight. The Supreme is the ultimate controller and proprietor of everything, and the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of the cosmic manifestation are under divine direction. The Son's action demonstrates the awareness of a person acting in devoted service, where he knows that the part played by him is not his by choice but is chosen for him by the Supreme and is done only through divine agency. He accepts that the timing and means are left to his due time and providence. My father illustrated this with a potter's wheel. The clay doesn't shape itself, the potter does. So it is with us under God's hands. In today's context, this mirrors project managers who succeed by following a higher strategy, not personal whims. This instrumental consciousness requires a fundamental shift in self-perception. Instead of viewing ourselves as independent agents struggling to impose our will upon the world, we learn to see ourselves as conscious participants in a larger intelligence that works through us when we align with its purposes. This shift typically reduces anxiety and increases effectiveness, as we stop trying to control outcomes beyond our actual influence. The metaphor of divine instrumentality appears throughout spiritual traditions. Christian mystics speak of becoming vessels for divine grace, Buddhist teachers emphasize non-self and interdependence, and Islamic spirituality includes the concept of being God's representatives, Khalifa, on earth. Each tradition recognizes that true spiritual maturity involves transcending egocentric concerns to serve larger purposes. Action without reaction. When one acts as the divine's instrument, one achieves action without material consequence. A devoted person does not expect good or bad results and gives up all sense of ownership over possessions. This is called having no sense of mine. The person in this position is fully controlled in mind and intelligence and operates without feverish mentality or lethargy. The Son's perfect awareness ensures he is immune to all reactions of his endeavors. He avoids the delusion of the materialist who, convinced by false self-identification, thinks he is the doer of everything. The devoted person, like the sun, is differentiated by his intent. He is engaged not for personal gratification, but for the satisfaction of the divine, a principle seen in artists creating for a higher purpose. This state of action without reaction represents the highest achievement of spiritual practice. It means performing our duties with full engagement and skill while remaining inwardly detached from success or failure, praise or blame, pleasure or pain. Such equanimity allows for greater effectiveness because decisions are made based on wisdom rather than emotional reactivity. Artists often experience glimpses of this consciousness when they become so absorbed in their creative work that the sense of separate selfhood temporarily dissolves. Athletes speak of being in the zone where peak performance happens effortlessly. Scientists describe moments of discovery when solutions emerge without forced thinking. These experiences point toward the constant state of inspired action that characterizes fully realized individuals. Following authorized direction, acting as an instrument requires acting strictly under authorized guidance. Arjuna was acting under the direct instruction of the divine. For those today, divine guidance comes through a line of spiritual teachers from a qualified guide. The instruction is that one must act firmly and obey the representative of the divine, and one should accept the guidance of a qualified teacher as one's mission in life. If one acts according to divine directions and under the guidance of an authentic representative, the result will be the same as acting under divine personal presence. The Son's reliance on the will of the Father exemplifies this necessary acceptance of superior authority, rejecting the whims of independent action or the temptation to create rules against the principles of revealed teachings, a caution relevant to today's influencers peddling unverified advice. The principle of authorized guidance addresses a crucial challenge for contemporary spiritual seekers: how to distinguish authentic teaching from the countless self-appointed gurus, coaches, and experts who flood the marketplace with spiritual advice. The traditional criteria include demonstrated realization of the teachings they share, connection to established lineages of practice, consistency with time-tested scriptures and principles, and fruits of wisdom, compassion, and service in their lives. Authentic spiritual guides typically emphasize their students' development rather than their own glorification, point toward universal principles rather than their personal opinions, and demonstrate humility about their own limitations while maintaining clarity about essential teachings. They help students develop discrimination and independence rather than creating dependency relationships. The Son's example reveals that surrender to divine will is not passive submission but active cooperation with the highest intelligence and love. This surrender transforms both the individual consciousness and the quality of action performed in the world. Beyond personal motivation, when the Son accepts his mission in the wilderness, he demonstrates the shift from personal motivation to divine inspiration. Personal motivation, however well-intentioned, remains limited by individual perspective, knowledge, and capacity. Divine inspiration accesses unlimited wisdom, power, and love, enabling actions that serve the highest good of all beings involved. This transformation typically occurs gradually through spiritual practice. Initial motivations might include desire for peace, meaning, or relief from suffering, all legitimate starting points that gradually purify as practice deepens. Eventually, practitioners discover that their deepest fulfillment comes through serving purposes larger than personal satisfaction. Healthcare workers often experience this evolution. Many enter medical fields initially motivated by career security, social status, or general desire to help others. Through years of service, especially during challenging circumstances like pandemics or natural disasters, they may discover a calling that transcends personal considerations, finding meaning through alleviating suffering regardless of personal cost or recognition. Paradox of effortless action. The Son's trials demonstrate the paradox of effortless action that emerges from complete surrender. Though he faces genuine temptations and challenges, his responses flow naturally from his established spiritual consciousness rather than requiring forced effort or internal struggle. This represents the fruition of spiritual practice. Virtue becomes natural rather than effortful. Beginning practitioners often experience spiritual life as difficult work requiring constant vigilance against negative tendencies. While this stage serves important purposes, it points toward eventual spontaneous goodness that characterizes mature realization. The son exemplifies this maturity. His responses to temptation arise from his nature rather than from moral effort. Athletes and artists frequently describe similar experiences where peak performance happens without strain or forced effort. Years of dedicated practice eventually yield moments of grace where skill expresses itself spontaneously. This serves as a metaphor for spiritual development, where continued practice eventually transforms consciousness itself rather than merely creating better behavioral habits. The son's example provides practical guidance for modern individuals seeking to integrate spiritual consciousness into daily activities across all areas of life. Professional life. Viewing one's career as divine service rather than merely personal advancement transforms both the quality of work performed and the satisfaction derived from it. A teacher who sees education as sacred calling approaches students differently than one motivated primarily by salary or job security. A business owner who considers commerce as an opportunity to serve society's needs makes different decisions than one focused solely on profit maximization. This shift doesn't require abandoning practical considerations like financial planning or career development. Rather, it places these concerns within a larger context of service and meaning. Paradoxically, when people perform their work with genuine care for its beneficiaries rather than exclusive focus on personal gain, they often achieve greater success by conventional measures as well. Family relationships. The son's obedience to the father provides a model for healthy family dynamics based on love and service rather than control and obligation. Parents who see their role as facilitating their children's highest development rather than imposing their own preferences create environments where young people can discover their authentic gifts and purposes. Similarly, children who appreciate their parents as imperfect human beings doing their best to provide guidance and support, rather than as sources of unlimited gratification, develop healthier relationships with authority and responsibility throughout their lives. Marriages benefit when partners view their relationship as an opportunity for mutual spiritual growth, rather than primarily as an arrangement for personal happiness or security. This perspective doesn't eliminate the importance of compatibility, affection, and practical considerations, but it provides a foundation that can weather the inevitable challenges that arise in long-term partnerships. Community engagement. The instrumental consciousness naturally leads to increased community involvement and social service. When individuals recognize their interconnection with all life, they spontaneously seek ways to contribute to collective well-being rather than focusing exclusively on personal or family interests. This might manifest as volunteer work, political engagement, environmental activism, or countless other forms of service. The key element is motivation, action taken from recognition of unity rather than from guilt, social pressure, or desire for recognition produces more sustainable and effective results. Despite its benefits, the consciousness of divine instrumentality faces predictable obstacles that practitioners must understand and address skillfully. Fear of passivity. Many people resist surrendering to divine will because they fear it will make them passive or ineffective. This concern reflects misunderstanding of what surrender actually involves. True surrender increases rather than decreases the quality of action because it aligns individual effort with cosmic intelligence. The son's trials demonstrate this principle clearly. His surrender to the Father's will doesn't make him weak or passive, but enables him to respond to each temptation with perfect wisdom and strength. Similarly, contemporary practitioners find that spiritual surrender typically increases their effectiveness in worldly affairs rather than diminishing it. Cultural conditioning. Modern Western culture strongly emphasizes individual autonomy, self-reliance, and personal achievement. While these values serve important functions, they can become obstacles to spiritual development when taken to extremes. Path of surrendered action requires finding balance between healthy independence and recognition of our fundamental interdependence. This cultural challenge appears particularly acute in professional environments that reward aggressive self-promotion, competitive attitudes, and exclusive focus on personal advancement. Integrating spiritual consciousness into such settings requires wisdom, patience, and often considerable courage to maintain authentic values while functioning effectively within existing systems. Spiritual pride. Ironically, spiritual practice itself can become a source of pride and separation if not approached with genuine humility. Practitioners may develop subtle superiority toward those who don't share their spiritual interests or achievements, defeating the very purpose of spiritual development, which is to recognize our fundamental unity with all beings. The sun's example provides an antidote to spiritual pride through his consistent humility and service orientation. Despite his exalted spiritual realization, he never uses his attainment to diminish others or exempt himself from ordinary responsibilities. This balance between spiritual development and human compassion characterizes authentic realization. Conclusion: the sun's immediate victory over the temptation of despair and rebellion in the wilderness establishes the fundamental blueprint for paradise regained. The living soul is redeemed only when they accept their eternal role as the obedient servant of the Supreme Divine. By perfectly demonstrating the constitutional position, maintaining steadfast consciousness, adhering to the imperative to obey, and acting solely as the divine instrument, the sun provides the pure knowledge required to achieve liberation from the bondage of personal actions. This devoted path, summarized in this chapter, ensures that even a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear, leading the sincere practitioner to be promoted to the stage of pure devoted awareness. The sun's perfect beginning in the waste wilderness guarantees his eventual triumph, setting the stage for the next phase of the trial, overcoming the gross material illusions of passion and greed. As my father often said, each step of obedience builds the bridge back home, a journey we will continue to explore. Practical implications of the sun's example extend into every area of human experience. Whether facing personal challenges, professional decisions, family responsibilities, or community service, the principles of surrendered action provide guidance for living with purpose, peace, and effectiveness. The wilderness that initially appears as a place of testing becomes transformed into a sanctuary of spiritual strength, demonstrating that any circumstance can become a means for spiritual growth when approached with the proper consciousness. This transformation from trial to triumph, from wilderness to sanctuary, from obedience to freedom, represents the universal spiritual journey available to every sincere seeker. The sun's path illuminates our own, showing that paradise regained is not a distant promise but a present possibility for all who choose the path of devoted service to the divine. Chapter 7: Consequence of Unregulated Desire. Therefore, O best of warriors, in the very beginning curb this great symbol of sin by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Bhagavad Gita 3:41. In the previous chapter, we established the Son of God as the perfect servant, whose triumph began with the simple, profound act of acknowledging his eternal identity as subordinate to the Supreme Controller. He entered the desert, his victorious field, fixed in obedience and unperturbed by the confusion that afflicted mankind. The struggle now shifts from the conceptual challenge of submission to the gross material allurements that perpetually bind the conditioned soul, the temptations of physical comfort, wealth, and worldly dominion. This chapter examines the second phase of the trial, rooted in Milton's Paradise Regained, Book 2, wherein Satan attempts to lure the sun by appealing to the most basic yet most destructive forces of material existence: lust, passion, and greed. The sun's perfect rejection of these snares serves as pure instruction for achieving true liberation. The entire endeavor of spiritual freedom hinges upon successfully regulating the senses against the internal enemy of desire, as powerfully instructed in our chapter motto. This guidance is the practical weapon wielded by the sun against the tempter's onslaught of material offerings. My father, during a quiet afternoon by the river, once reflected, "Son, desire is a wildfire. Uncontrolled, it consumes. Regulated, it fuels the soul's ascent." This chapter, enriched by his wisdom and the Gita's teachings, explores how the sun's mastery over these temptations paves the way to paradise regained, offering a lesson for today's society grappling with consumerism and unbridled ambition. Challenge of material desire. Before examining the specific temptations faced by the sun, it's essential to understand the universal nature of material desire and its role in spiritual life. The Gita presents desire not as inherently evil but as a force that becomes destructive when unregulated and misdirected. Like fire, desire can serve beneficial purposes when properly controlled, providing motivation for constructive action, creativity, and even spiritual aspiration, but becomes catastrophically destructive when allowed to burn without restraint. Contemporary psychology recognizes similar dynamics in understanding human motivation and addiction. The same neurochemical pathways that drive us toward necessary survival activities like eating and reproduction can become hijacked by artificial stimulants, leading to compulsive behaviors that ultimately undermine well-being. Modern consumer culture deliberately exploits these vulnerabilities, creating artificial desires through sophisticated marketing techniques that promise fulfillment through material acquisition. The Sun's encounter with temptation provides a masterclass in recognizing and transcending these manipulative appeals. His responses demonstrate principles that remain relevant for anyone seeking to maintain spiritual focus while navigating a world designed to capture and exploit human desires. Satan, observing the Sun's physical vulnerability after fasting 40 days, launches his opening temptation by appealing to necessity. He attempts to exploit the natural desire for food, disguised as a reasonable observer, tempting the Sun to utilize his divine power for immediate personal comfort, turning the stones of the wilderness into bread. Lust as the destroyer of knowledge. This temptation, seemingly benign, targets the senses, which the Gita identifies as the sitting places of lust. Lust, or the uncontrolled craving for pleasure, is the greatest sinful enemy and the primary force that obscures the pure consciousness of the living soul. Like smoke covering fire or dust covering a mirror, it shrouds the spiritual spark. The ultimate goal is self-realization, and lust is the force that acts as the destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. In today's world, this mirrors the obsession with instant gratification that characterizes much of contemporary culture. Fast food promises immediate satisfaction while undermining long-term health. Social media platforms provide instant dopamine hits through likes and comments while fragmenting attention and reducing capacity for sustained focus. Consumer culture promotes the illusion that happiness can be purchased, leading to cycles of acquisition and disappointment that prevent deeper fulfillment. The Sun's transcendental stability is evident in his immediate, unwavering reply, establishing that his dependence is fixed upon the Supreme. Man lives not by bread only, but each word proceeding from the mouth of God. He recognizes that true sustenance comes from aligning with the divine order, not through material sense gratification. This principle extends far beyond literal food consumption. The Sun demonstrates that spiritual beings require spiritual nourishment, meaning, purpose, connection with the transcendent, more than material comforts. While physical needs must be met appropriately, they should not dominate consciousness or dictate life priorities. The science of sense regulation. Modern neuroscience validates ancient teachings about the importance of sense regulation. Research shows that practices like mindful eating, digital fasting, and sensory meditation literally rewire the brain, strengthening areas associated with self-control while reducing reactivity to impulsive desires. Studies of successful athletes, artists, and entrepreneurs consistently show that peak performance requires the ability to delay immediate gratification in service of longer-term goals. The Sun's temperance, invincible besides, for no allurement yields to appetite, represents the perfected state toward which all spiritual discipline aims. This doesn't mean suppressing natural needs, but rather maintaining conscious choice about when and how to satisfy them, ensuring that physical requirements serve spiritual purposes rather than dominating them. A person fixed in spiritual consciousness is automatically trained not to accept food not meant for human consumption. This extends beyond dietary choices to include all forms of sensory input, entertainment, information, social interactions that either support or undermine spiritual development. The Sun's refusal confirms that the path to curbing destructive desire begins with regulation of the senses, ensuring that the body is maintained only to remain fit for service to the divine. Applications of sense regulation. The principle of sense regulation finds practical application across all areas of modern life. Digital consumption. Just as the Sun refuses to create bread from stones for immediate gratification, contemporary practitioners might establish boundaries around social media use, choosing specific times for checking messages rather than responding to every notification impulse. This creates space for deeper focus and more meaningful activities. Consumer choices. the spiritual principle of need versus want becomes relevant when making purchasing decisions. Rather than buying items impulsively based on advertising appeals or social pressure, spiritually minded individuals might pause to consider whether acquisitions truly serve their well-being or merely feed desires for status and novelty. Entertainment selection. The quality of mental input significantly affects consciousness, just as food quality affects physical health. Choosing entertainment that elevates rather than degrades consciousness, books, films, music that inspire rather than merely stimulate, supports spiritual development. Relationship boundaries. Sense regulation includes discernment about social environments and relationships. Spending time with people who encourage spiritual growth rather than those who constantly seek material pleasures helps maintain proper focus and values. When the temptation of necessity fails, Satan shifts his strategy to the more intoxicating allure of material ambition. He argues that the sun's great purpose requires great means of enterprise, postulating the mantra of the materialist: money brings honor, friends, conquest, and realms. The conditioning of passion. The mode of passion is driven by ambition and intense, insatiable endeavor. It is characterized by great attachment, uncontrollable desire, hankering, and intense effort. Activities performed in this mode are enacted from a sense of false self-identification and are always done with great effort, all directed towards satisfying personal desires. The result of such endeavors, divorced from transcendental purpose, is ultimately miserable. Satan's argument perfectly reflects this mentality, the belief that one must accumulate vast resources to accomplish anything significant. This mindset binds the individual to the fruits of action, perpetually cycling through work and reaction, a pattern evident in modern corporate burnout driven by endless profit-chasing and growth imperatives. The mode of passion creates a particular kind of suffering because it generates temporary satisfaction followed by increased craving. Unlike ignorance, which produces dullness and apathy, passion creates high energy and engagement but directs it toward ultimately futile pursuits. People in passion work extremely hard and achieve impressive results by material standards, yet find themselves increasingly anxious, competitive, and dissatisfied. Contemporary examples include workaholism, status anxiety, and the constant pressure to upgrade lifestyle markers: larger houses, newer cars, more expensive vacations. A passionate person achieves these goals but discovers that each accomplishment only temporarily satisfies before generating new desires. Treadmill of ambition accelerates rather than providing lasting fulfillment. The demonic mentality of greed. Directly springing from the mode of passion is greed, one of the three principal causes that lead to the degradation of the soul. Satan's counsel is the voice of the demonic, whose desires to acquire money are unlimited. The Gita describes this consciousness. The demonic person thinks, "So much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more according to my schemes. So much is mine now, and it will increase in the future more and more." This individual is convinced by false self-identification that I am the Lord of everything, I am the enjoyer, I am perfect, powerful, and happy. This relentless striving leads the demonic to act in any sinful way, often securing wealth through illegal or unethical means, thinking that their vast wealth results from their own endeavor and personal ability, rather than understanding the complex web of interdependence that makes any achievement possible. My father once warned, "Greed is a bottomless pit. Modern billionaires chasing ever more wealth prove it daily." This observation highlights how even those who achieve unprecedented material success often remain driven by insatiable desire for more, suggesting that the problem lies not in insufficient resources but in the consciousness that relates to resources as the source of security and identity. The psychology of never enough. Modern psychology recognizes patterns of addiction and compulsion that parallel the Gita's description of passionate and greedy mentalities. Researchers have identified hedonic adaptation, the tendency for increases in wealth or material possessions to provide only temporary satisfaction before baseline happiness levels return. This creates a cycle where individuals constantly seek external changes to maintain the temporary highs associated with acquisition. Studies of wealthy individuals consistently show that beyond meeting basic needs, additional wealth provides diminishing returns in terms of actual well-being. Yet the cultural narrative that equates financial success with personal worth creates psychological pressure to continue accumulating regardless of actual need or satisfaction. The demonic mentality described in the Gita manifests in contemporary culture through several recognizable patterns. Corporate malfeasance. Companies that prioritize short-term profits over long-term sustainability, employee well-being, or environmental protection exemplify greedy consciousness that justifies harmful actions through self-serving rationalizations. Political corruption. Public officials who exploit their positions for personal gain rather than serving constituents demonstrate the demonic tendency to consider oneself the lord of everything, entitled to unlimited acquisition. Social media influence. The commodification of personal relationships and experiences for monetary gain, treating followers as sources of income rather than genuine community, reflects the greedy consciousness that sees everything as potential profit. Environmental destruction. Industries that externalize environmental costs while privatizing profits demonstrate the demonic blindness to interdependence and long-term consequences that characterizes unlimited desire for personal gain. Satan escalates his offer, presenting the panoramic view of kingdoms and their glory, urging the Son to accept the throne of a vast empire to fulfill his mission. The Son, however, with calmness unprovoked, dismisses this temptation, recognizing its futility. True renunciation. This definitive rejection represents the hallmark of true renunciation. Text clearly states that renunciation of work and work in devotion both lead to liberation, but work in devotion is better than mere renunciation of fruit of work. The true renunciate is defined as one who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as he is obligated. The Son's rejection of the throne is not an escape from duty, but recognition that this particular material kingship is not his prescribed responsibility. His mission is transcendental, not political, and attempting to seize power prematurely or through Satan's means would constitute engaging in another's duties, which is dangerous. This distinction becomes crucial for understanding spiritual renunciation in contemporary contexts. True renunciation doesn't require abandoning all worldly activities but rather transforming the consciousness with which activities are performed. Parent caring for children with love and attention to their development engages in spiritual practice. A teacher instructing students with genuine concern for their growth serves the divine through education. A business owner operating ethically while providing valuable services participates in spiritual action. Timing of divine action. The Son asserts that all events are best fulfilled in their due time, and leaves the outcome to his due time and providence. This submission to divine timing represents a crucial aspect of spiritual maturity, understanding that forcing outcomes through inappropriate means ultimately undermines the very purposes we hope to achieve. Contemporary applications include resisting pressure to compromise ethical principles for career advancement, refusing to exploit relationships for personal gain, and maintaining faith in natural processes rather than manipulating situations through dishonest means. The Son's patience demonstrates that aligned action performed at the right time with pure motivation achieves more than aggressive effort driven by personal ambition. Leadership through example. The Son's conduct serves the purpose of educating others through his example. Whatever action is performed by a great person, common people follow in his footsteps. By demonstrating perfect, non-attached action, the Son sets an ideal standard, showing that true leadership requires adhering strictly to divine principles rather than following materialistic paths. This principle applies to anyone in positions of influence: parents, teachers, supervisors, community leaders. The consciousness with which we perform our roles inevitably affects those who observe us. Leaders who maintain integrity despite external pressures inspire others to similar dedication. Those who compromise principles for expedience teach others that ethics are optional when convenience demands it. Contemporary examples of principled leadership include ethical business practices. Company leaders who maintain fair labor practices, environmental responsibility, and honest marketing despite competitive pressures demonstrate the Son's example of rejecting expedient but harmful shortcuts. Educational integrity. Teachers and professors who prioritize genuine learning over standardized test scores or grade inflation serve their students' actual development rather than artificial metrics. Political service. Public officials who make decisions based on constituents' long-term welfare rather than political popularity or personal advantage exemplify the sun's rejection of power for its own sake. Community leadership. Individuals who organize neighborhood improvements, volunteer for charitable causes, or mentor young people without seeking recognition demonstrate service-oriented leadership. As Satan unveils the panoramic majesty of Rome and its attendant grandeur and majestic show of luxury, the sun remains unmoved. He sees the vast empire not as glory, but as a system that governs nations under yoke and is built on lust and rapine. The pitfall of passionate happiness. The sun perceives that happiness derived from material magnificence is contaminated by the mode of passion. The Gita explains that there are three kinds of happiness the conditioned soul experiences. The happiness derived from passionate action is that which in the beginning may be just like nectar but at the end is just like poison. Such temporary, sensory enjoyment is pursued by those focused on personal gratification. My father once noted, "Luxury fades. Look at former celebrities desperately chasing youth and relevance." This observation highlights how material pleasures, no matter how refined or expensive, inevitably disappoint because they cannot satisfy the soul's deeper needs for meaning, connection, and transcendence. The passionate happiness that characterizes much of contemporary culture follows predictable patterns: initial excitement about new acquisitions, experiences, or achievements, brief satisfaction while novelty remains, gradual habituation and boredom, renewed seeking for the next source of stimulation. This cycle prevents individuals from discovering the more stable happiness that comes through spiritual development and genuine service. The wisdom of spiritual indifference. The sun stands above material attractions as one whose activities of self-realization are night for persons materially absorbed. Materialistic people, being asleep to self-realization, dream of varieties of sense pleasure while perpetually suffering happiness and distress. The sun, however, is always indifferent to materialistic happiness and distress, and continues his spiritual activities undisturbed by material reaction. This spiritual indifference should not be confused with callousness or lack of compassion. Rather, it represents freedom from being controlled by external circumstances. When one's happiness depends on material conditions, wealth, health, relationships, achievements, one becomes vulnerable to constant anxiety about gaining and maintaining these conditions. Spiritual indifference means finding a source of peace and contentment that remains stable regardless of changing circumstances. Contemporary examples include individuals who maintain equanimity during economic downturns, health challenges, or social difficulties because their sense of identity and purpose comes from sources deeper than material security. This doesn't mean ignoring practical responsibilities, but rather maintaining perspective about what truly matters for genuine well-being. The transcendental platform. By rejecting the fleeting sovereignty of the world, the sun demonstrates his position on the transcendental platform of spiritual consciousness, which is the only means of being delivered from the clutches of this contaminated material world. This achievement of spiritual stability, where one is no longer worried about the dualities of the material world, such as heat and cold or misery and happiness, makes him eligible for liberation. The transcendental platform represents a state of consciousness that remains constant regardless of external fluctuations. Like the sun that shines equally on pleasant gardens and garbage dumps, the spiritually realized person maintains inner peace whether experiencing material success or failure, praise or criticism, pleasure or pain. This stability comes not through suppressing natural human emotions but through identifying with the eternal spiritual self rather than temporary material circumstances. When consciousness is rooted in relationship with the divine, external events become opportunities for service and growth rather than sources of disturbance. Satan's progression from basic physical needs to wealth to political power reflects a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. Each temptation appeals to a different level of desire, from survival instincts to ego gratification to the ultimate fantasy of unlimited control. The hierarchy of desires. Modern psychology recognizes hierarchical patterns in human motivations similar to those demonstrated in the sun's temptations. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs suggests that humans focus on basic survival requirements before seeking safety, belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. Satan's temptations follow a similar progression, appealing first to physical needs, then security through wealth, and finally to the highest ego gratification through dominion over others. The Sun's responses demonstrate that spiritual consciousness transcends this hierarchy by finding fulfillment through connection with the divine rather than satisfaction of escalating material desires. This doesn't eliminate natural needs but places them in proper perspective relative to spiritual purposes. The illusion of control. Each of Satan's offers promises increased control over circumstances, the power to create food at will, the security that comes with wealth, the authority that accompanies political position. These appeals target the fundamental anxiety that accompanies material existence, the fear of being vulnerable to forces beyond our control. The Sun's rejections demonstrate that true security comes not through accumulating power over external circumstances but through alignment with the intelligence and love that governs the universe. This surrender paradoxically provides greater security than attempts at control because it connects individual consciousness with unlimited divine resources. The progression of spiritual testing. The sequence of temptations also represents the natural progression of challenges that face spiritual practitioners. Beginning seekers often struggle with basic sensory desires, food, entertainment, sexual impulses. As practice matures, more subtle temptations emerge related to wealth, status, and recognition. Advanced practitioners may face the ultimate test of spiritual pride, the temptation to use spiritual attainments for personal aggrandizement rather than service. The Sun's responses provide guidance for each stage of this progression, showing that the fundamental principle remains constant, maintaining focus on divine will rather than personal gratification, regardless of the level at which temptation operates. The Sun's example provides practical guidance for navigating the particular challenges of contemporary life, where traditional sources of meaning have weakened while sophisticated marketing and technology create unprecedented opportunities for distraction and desire. Digital age challenges. Modern technology creates temptations that parallel those faced by the Sun but operate at unprecedented speed and scale. Social media platforms offer the digital equivalent of turning stones to bread, instant gratification through likes, comments, and shares that temporarily satisfy the ego's need for recognition but leave deeper needs unmet. The wealth temptation appears in the form of get-rich-quick schemes, cryptocurrency speculation, and the constant pressure to monetize every skill or hobby. Promise that money will solve all problems remains as seductive today as when Satan offered the Sun unlimited resources. Power temptation manifests through opportunities to build online influence, manipulate public opinion, or exploit others' vulnerabilities for personal advantage. The democratization of media has made it possible for anyone to seek the kind of dominion that once required political or military achievement. Maintaining spiritual focus. The Sun's example suggests several principles for maintaining spiritual focus amid contemporary distractions. Conscious consumption. Making deliberate choices about information intake, entertainment, and social interactions rather than passively consuming whatever appears most immediately appealing. Purpose-driven action. Evaluating opportunities based on their alignment with genuine service and personal growth rather than immediate gratification or external recognition. Community support. Associating with others who share similar values and spiritual aspirations, providing mutual encouragement to maintain higher perspectives when surrounded by materialistic culture. Regular practice. Maintaining daily spiritual disciplines that strengthen inner stability and discrimination, making it easier to recognize and reject subtle temptations. Service orientation. Finding ways to contribute to others' well-being, which naturally reduces self-centered concerns and provides meaning that transcends material achievements. The Sun's rejection should not be interpreted as condemnation of all material engagement but rather as demonstration of the proper relationship between spiritual and material dimensions of existence. Sacred materialism. When consciousness is properly oriented toward the divine, material activities become opportunities for spiritual expression rather than obstacles to spiritual development. Eating becomes communion with the source of nourishment, work becomes service to the common good, and relationships become opportunities for mutual spiritual growth. Key lies in motivation and awareness. Activities performed with genuine care for their beneficiaries and conscious recognition of divine presence become forms of worship, while the same activities performed solely for personal gratification or ego satisfaction create spiritual bondage. The middle path. The sun's example suggests a middle path between indulgence and extreme asceticism. He doesn't condemn food, wealth, or authority as inherently evil but rather demonstrates proper relationship with them. Basic needs are met appropriately, resources are accepted when they serve legitimate purposes, and authority is exercised when it genuinely benefits others. This balanced approach provides practical guidance for contemporary spiritual seekers who must navigate material responsibilities while maintaining spiritual focus. The goal is not to eliminate all desires but to purify them, ensuring they serve rather than subvert spiritual development. Conclusion. The second phase of the temptation, culminating in the rejection of wealth and power, serves as definitive instruction on conquering the grossest obstacles to spiritual life. The sun's victory over lust, passion, and greed confirms that the path to paradise regained lies not in achieving external glory, but in achieving internal mastery, perfect self-control, and unwavering focus on the Supreme. My father often said, "Control the mind and you control the world." This wisdom reflects the understanding that outer circumstances naturally align when inner consciousness is properly established. The sun demonstrates that true power comes through surrender to divine will rather than assertion of personal ambition. The sun has thus proved that the performance of devotional service is superior to any temporary material gain. His actions, performed without attachment for the sake of leading people on the right path, demonstrate authentic spiritual practice that ensures he is not affected by sinful reactions. His purity is absolute, placing him beyond all three modes of material nature. Having conquered the internal enemies of desire, which were the root cause of Adam and Eve's misery and entanglement, the sun proceeds with confidence toward the final challenges. His mastery over material temptations provides a foundation of inner strength that will serve him in the subtler trials to come. The lesson for contemporary seekers is clear. Genuine spiritual progress requires honest confrontation with our desires and the willingness to subordinate immediate gratification to higher purposes. This doesn't mean suppressing natural needs but rather ensuring they serve rather than dominate our spiritual development. The sun's example shows that such discipline, far from creating deprivation, opens the door to fulfillment that transcends anything material pleasure can provide. Through regulation of the senses, transformation of desire into devotion, and consistent focus on divine service, the paradise that was lost through uncontrolled craving can be regained through conscious surrender to the supreme will. This is the promise held out to all sincere practitioners, that inner mastery creates the foundation for eternal peace and unlimited spiritual realization. Chapter 8. The Lure of the Intellect and Pride. I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god, and he instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to his son. Bhagavad Gita 4:1. Preceding chapters chronicled the Son of God's perfect execution of spiritual discipline, establishing him as the perfect servant by rejecting illusory independence. He then repelled the grossest temptations of the material modes, the hunger of the senses and the ambition of worldly wealth and glory. Having proved immune to the grandeur and majestic show of luxury, the sun now faces the most subtle and pervasive trap set by the tempter, the lure of the intellect and the pride of scholarly achievement. This chapter examines the third phase of the trial, rooted in Milton's Paradise Regained, Book 3, where Satan attempts to convince the sun that his divine purpose must be actualized through established worldly means, military conquest, political mastery, and human knowledge. The sun's triumph in this sphere provides the definitive instruction that liberation requires knowledge received exclusively through an authorized line of teaching, thereby defeating those who would corrupt spiritual wisdom with personal interpretations. The fundamental basis for this truth is affirmed in our chapter motto, establishing the imperative that genuine spiritual science must be transmitted through a pure, unbroken chain of succession, a principle the sun upholds against the chaotic schemes of the tempter. My father, during a thoughtful evening walk, once said, "Son, true wisdom flows like a river from its source. Stray from the stream and you're lost in a desert of pride." This chapter, guided by his insight in the Gita's teachings, explores how the sun's rejection of intellectual vanity illuminates the path to paradise regained, offering a lesson for today's scholars and seekers. The nature of intellectual pride. Before examining Satan's specific temptations, it's crucial to understand the unique challenge posed by intellectual pride. Unlike the gross temptations of sensual pleasure or material accumulation, intellectual pride presents itself as noble and spiritual. The desire for knowledge appears virtuous, the quest for understanding seems admirable, and the accumulation of learning feels like genuine progress. This subtlety makes intellectual pride particularly dangerous for spiritual seekers. The nature of intellectual pride. Before examining Satan's specific temptations, it's crucial to understand the unique challenge posed by intellectual pride. Unlike the gross temptations of sensual pleasure or material accumulation, intellectual pride presents itself as noble and spiritual. The desire for knowledge appears virtuous, the quest for understanding seems admirable, and the accumulation of learning feels like genuine progress. This subtlety makes intellectual pride particularly dangerous for spiritual seekers. While most people recognize greed and lust as obstacles to spiritual development, fewer understand how the pursuit of knowledge itself can become a trap when motivated by false ego rather than genuine service. The scholar who masters texts to impress others, the teacher who prioritizes appearing wise over helping students, and the seeker who collects spiritual techniques like trophies all demonstrate how noble activities can serve ignoble purposes. Contemporary culture amplifies these challenges through the democratization of information and the proliferation of expert voices across all media. Never before have so many people had access to so much knowledge, yet this abundance often creates confusion rather than clarity. The sheer volume of available information makes discrimination between authentic and inauthentic teachings increasingly difficult, while social media rewards provocative opinions over measured wisdom. Satan begins Book 3 of Paradise Regained by renewing his assault on the Son's sense of purpose, arguing that the quickest path to becoming savior to mankind is through establishing political and military dominance. He first attempts to tempt the Son with the glory of military empires, such as Parthia and Rome, subtly praising the effectiveness of human effort and conquest, urging him to seize the throne of David by political force. The temptation of unauthorized action. Satan's suggestion that the Son should rush the process of redemption by seizing immediate power, gathering a retinue, and exploiting the dizzy multitude, constitutes an appeal to unauthorized or misdirected action. While action done according to spiritual principles leads to purification, action done against divine guidance or outside the divine plan leads only to bondage. In modern terms, this mirrors corporate leaders bypassing ethics for quick success, politicians using divisive rhetoric to gain power, or activists employing harmful methods to advance beneficial causes. The psychological appeal of this temptation lies in its apparent reasonableness. Why shouldn't divine purposes be advanced through effective worldly means? Why not use available power structures to accomplish spiritual goals? The answer reveals a crucial principle: the means inevitably shape the ends. Methods based on force, manipulation, or deception cannot produce genuine spiritual transformation, regardless of the stated intentions. The Son's rejection of this political path is absolute, resting on the conviction that everything must be best fulfilled in their due time, and entrusted to his due time and providence. He understands that he is not meant to be a transient earthly ruler but the upholder of eternal spiritual principles. The greatest spiritual teachers must behave properly even before instructing others, following the principles of Scripture and never attempting to create rules against the principles of revealed teachings. Relevance of divine timing. The Son's insistence on divine timing rather than forced action provides crucial guidance for contemporary spiritual practitioners who live in cultures that emphasize immediate results and rapid progress. Pressure to achieve quick spiritual advancement, demonstrate measurable growth, or produce visible changes in the world can lead practitioners to adopt methods that undermine their deeper purposes. This principle applies across multiple domains. Personal development. The tendency to force spiritual experiences through extreme practices, drug use, or emotional manipulation rather than allowing natural maturation through consistent, balanced practice. Social change. The temptation to use divisive or violent methods to advance beneficial social causes rather than working through patient education, dialogue, and example. Religious leadership. The pressure to grow religious communities through entertainment, emotional manipulation, or compromise of principles rather than authentic teaching and genuine transformation. Educational reform. The desire to improve educational outcomes through standardized testing, competitive pressure, or technological shortcuts rather than supporting teachers and students in authentic learning relationships. The dangers of passion-driven work. Satan's strategy promotes action driven by passion, characterized by great effort by one seeking fruitive results and enacted from a sense of false self-identification. The Son, however, is a perfect servant who acts without attachment to the result of his work. He is convinced that the empires of the world, like Rome, are merely products of passionate corruption, governing nations under yoke and exhausting provinces by lust and rapine. By rejecting the opportunity for worldly conquest, the Son fulfills his spiritual responsibility. The instruction states that it is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though they may be faulty, than another's duties. The Son's duty is redemption through perfect obedience, not ruling through material might. He demonstrates that a person in spiritual consciousness can participate in any action, even challenging tasks, without being disturbed by material dualities, provided it is done for divine satisfaction, a principle reflected in peacemakers who reject violence even when it might produce faster results. This teaching addresses a common confusion among spiritually minded people about engagement with worldly affairs. Some conclude that spiritual life requires complete withdrawal from political, social, or economic activities. Others believe that spiritual principles require aggressive activism to reform society. The Son's example suggests a middle path. Engage fully in appropriate activities while maintaining inner detachment from results and refusing to compromise spiritual principles for expedient outcomes. Having failed to tempt the Son with power over the body and the material realm, Satan makes his final, most subtle appeal to the mind. He presents the intellectual glory of the Western canon, urging the Son to study sage philosophy, including the streams of the academics, peripatetics, and Stoics. Satan implies that true mastery of divine purpose requires absorbing human wisdom, a trap that elevates the intellect over divine revelation. The illusion of self-derived knowledge. This temptation targets the pride of intellectual achievement, a pitfall the Gita warns against. People of small knowledge are very much attached to the flowery words which recommend various fruitive activities for elevation to heavenly planets. Such vain philosophy or speculative knowledge is likened to sacrificing wisdom that leads to confusion rather than liberation. In today's context, this mirrors academics debating theories without spiritual grounding, producing endless papers with little practical impact on human well-being. The contemporary academic environment particularly exemplifies this trap. Universities reward publication over wisdom, theoretical innovation over practical application, and specialized knowledge over integrated understanding. Professors who never leave their libraries may know more facts about spiritual traditions than practicing devotees, yet lack the experiential understanding that comes through actual spiritual discipline. This pattern extends beyond formal academia into popular culture, where spiritual concepts become topics for intellectual discussion rather than practical transformation. The people collect spiritual ideas like souvenirs, enjoying the sense of sophistication that comes from familiarity with diverse traditions while avoiding the actual work of implementing any particular path consistently. Intellectual seduction. The Son's response is rooted in his reliance on divine guidance. Think not but that I know these things, or have not read the authors thou hast named. Yet he asserts that such learning is but to know that which before us lies in daily life. He understands that true wisdom transcends academic pursuits, aligning with the Gita's teaching that divine wisdom is maintainable by surrender rather than intellectual effort alone. My father once said, "Books are tools, not masters, divine truth is the guide." This rejection of vain philosophy sets the stage for understanding the superiority of authorized knowledge over speculative thinking. The Son's response reveals several crucial principles. Practical wisdom. True knowledge should enhance rather than complicate daily life. Spiritual understanding that cannot be applied to ordinary circumstances remains merely theoretical. Integrated learning. The highest wisdom synthesizes rather than fragments understanding. Academic specialization, while useful for specific purposes, should not replace the integrated vision that sees underlying unity. Experiential validation. Intellectual understanding gains value when confirmed through direct experience. Ideas that sound impressive but produce no transformation in consciousness or behavior reveal their limitations. Service orientation. Knowledge pursued for personal aggrandizement serves different purposes than knowledge sought to benefit others. The motivation behind learning significantly affects its spiritual value. The definitive instruction delivered through this confrontation is that true knowledge must be derived from an authorized source, because it is difficult to understand without proper guidance. This principle addresses one of the most crucial challenges facing contemporary spiritual seekers: how to distinguish authentic teaching from the countless variations, interpretations, and innovations that flood the spiritual marketplace. The eternal chain of instruction. The chapter motto details how the divine originally imparted the imperishable science of yoga to the sun god, who instructed Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu instructed his son. This science was especially meant for saintly rulers because they were responsible for executing its purpose in guiding the citizens. Text reveals that this succession was broken in the course of time, and authentic knowledge became scattered by the motives of those who introduced personal interpretations. To follow the path of liberation, one must follow the example of Arjuna, who accepted the divine as the supreme reality. Anyone who follows in Arjuna's footsteps is certainly not bewildered. This chain of teaching or disciplic succession ensures the purity of knowledge, as my father explained. It's like a family recipe. Passed down unchanged, it retains its authentic flavor. In modern times, this parallels trusted mentorship programs that preserve authentic skills and knowledge. The principle of authorized transmission reflects deep understanding of how spiritual knowledge actually functions. Unlike academic information, which can be conveyed through books and lectures alone, spiritual wisdom requires the living example and personal guidance of someone who has integrated the teachings into their own consciousness and behavior. This transmission occurs on multiple levels. Intellectual understanding. The concepts and practices must be clearly explained and correctly understood. Emotional integration. The student must develop the proper attitudes and motivations that support spiritual development rather than ego gratification. Practical application. The teachings must be implemented in daily life through consistent practice under qualified guidance. Character transformation. The ultimate goal is transformation of character and consciousness, not merely accumulation of spiritual knowledge. Living example. Students learn as much from observing their teacher's character and behavior as from formal instruction. Traditional spiritual communities developed elaborate systems to preserve authentic transmission across generations. These included requirements for students to demonstrate character development before receiving advanced teachings, extended periods of service to test motivation, and careful selection of qualified successors to maintain teaching lineages. Challenges to authentic transmission. Modern culture poses unique challenges to traditional transmission methods. Democratization of information. Anyone can now publish books, create videos, or establish online communities teaching spiritual practices, regardless of their qualifications or level of realization. Consumer mentality. Students often approach spiritual teaching as consumers shopping for products rather than disciples seeking transformation, leading to superficial engagement with multiple traditions simultaneously. Institutional breakdown. Traditional structures that supported long-term student-teacher relationships have weakened, leaving many seekers without sustained guidance through the challenges of spiritual development. Cultural translation. Ancient teachings developed in specific cultural contexts must be adapted for contemporary circumstances without losing their essential meaning. Authority issues. Modern individualism creates resistance to the humility and surrender traditionally required for authentic spiritual learning. The archetypal misleading teacher. Satan, having failed in direct conflict, operates as the definitive artificer of fraud. His function is to mislead mankind by corrupting the divine message. Milton explicitly states that Satan's deception works because people fell idolatrous, giving way to his delusions. Satan's efforts to divert the sun are identical to those of speculative teachers who have very little knowledge of divine truth and who try to banish or reinterpret authentic teachings when writing commentary. Such unauthorized interpretation is misleading and dangerous. Great spiritual teachers have warned that understanding authentic scriptures from speculative viewpoints will commit a great error, causing students to be confused on the path of spiritual guidance. The sun's understanding, derived from perfect faith, stands in stark contrast to those who are self-complacent and perform practices in name only without following any rules, as seen in today's self-proclaimed spiritual authorities. Characteristics of misleading teaching. Satan's approach reveals patterns that characterize inauthentic spiritual teaching. Appeal to pride. Misleading teachers flatter students' egos rather than encouraging the humility necessary for genuine spiritual development. Promise of shortcuts. They offer quick results or easy methods that bypass the sustained effort traditionally required for spiritual maturation. Intellectual complexity. They emphasize sophisticated theories and complex philosophies that impress the mind but don't necessarily transform character. Independence from authority. They encourage students to reject traditional guidance in favor of personal interpretation and individual spiritual discovery. Focus on technique. They emphasize methods and practices while neglecting the character development and surrender that make techniques effective. Commercial motivation. They treat spiritual teaching as a business opportunity rather than sacred service. Recognizing authentic guidance. In contrast, authentic spiritual guidance typically demonstrates certain characteristics. Emphasis on character. Genuine teachers prioritize students' character development over impressive spiritual experiences or sophisticated understanding. Connection to tradition. They maintain clear connections to established lineages while adapting teachings appropriately for contemporary circumstances. Personal example. Their own lives demonstrate the fruits of the teachings they share, showing integration of spiritual principles into daily behavior. Service orientation. They clearly prioritize students' spiritual welfare over personal gain, recognition, or institutional advancement. Balanced approach. They maintain balance between compassion and discipline, neither enabling students' weaknesses nor crushing their confidence. Long-term commitment. They maintain relationships with students over extended periods, supporting them through the ups and downs of spiritual development. The sun's triumphant answer to Satan's philosophical challenge is to assert the ultimate, inexhaustible power of transcendental truth. He understands that knowledge of divine will is the only thing capable of overcoming the darkness born of ignorance. The highest perfection of knowledge. The knowledge the sun possesses is described as transcendental understanding, the basis of recognizing the self as the eternal servant of the divine, far superior to all other processes of knowledge. The wise person, being in factual knowledge, must not agitate those confused by material identification. The sun acts wisely, simply stating the truth and refusing to engage in further useless debate that would only validate Satan's speculative agenda, a stance relevant to modern debates where humility and clarity serve better than intellectual combat. This approach reflects mature spiritual understanding that recognizes the limitations of argumentation in producing genuine conviction. While logical reasoning has its place in spiritual development, ultimate realization comes through direct experience rather than intellectual persuasion. The sun's example shows that authentic spiritual authority manifests through example and presence rather than rhetorical skill. Knowledge and devotion. The sun's wisdom lies in his ability to discriminate between actions that serve divine purposes and those that merely satisfy personal ambition. This intelligence, classified as understanding in the mode of goodness, allows him to correctly identify what leads to liberation and what creates further bondage. He is fixed in the knowledge that he is a part of the Supreme, and therefore his role is not his by choice but is chosen for him by the Supreme and is done only through divine agency. My father likened this to a script. We're actors, not directors. Follow the author's lines. This metaphor illustrates the relationship between individual will and divine purpose. Like skilled actors who find creative expression within their assigned roles rather than rewriting the play, mature spiritual practitioners discover freedom through conscious cooperation with divine will rather than assertion of personal preferences. This integration of knowledge and devotion addresses a common split in spiritual communities between those who emphasize understanding and those who prioritize devotional practices. The sun's example shows that the highest spiritual development requires both intellectual clarity about our relationship with the divine and emotional surrender to that relationship. The end of philosophical doubt. By the close of this chapter, the sun has neutralized Satan's power over the material, political, and intellectual domains. His reliance on divine direction ensures that his activities are always auspicious, free from the reactions of pious or impious actions, a state called renunciation. He remains fixed in the knowledge that he is the soul and the divine is the controller. The sun's absolute reliance on divine will, receiving and executing the instructions of the living oracle, achieves the perfection of spiritual understanding. Having attained this transcendental state, the sun is now positioned for the final, most direct confrontation concerning the nature of his very identity. He has cut off all philosophical doubt and speculation, ensuring that the path to paradise regained is firmly illuminated by pure knowledge. The sun's example provides crucial guidance for contemporary spiritual seekers who must navigate unprecedented access to information while distinguishing authentic wisdom from sophisticated speculation. Developing spiritual discrimination. The ability to distinguish authentic spiritual teaching from imitation requires developing what traditional texts call spiritual discrimination. This faculty emerges through character assessment, observing whether teachers demonstrate the virtues they advocate, particularly humility, compassion, and selfless service. Fruit evaluation, examining whether engagement with particular teachings produces genuine transformation in consciousness and behavior, or merely intellectual satisfaction. Traditional consistency, comparing contemporary presentations with established scriptural authorities to identify significant departures or innovations. Community health, observing whether spiritual communities demonstrate mutual respect, genuine care for members' welfare, and balanced psychological development. Long-term sustainability, assessing whether spiritual practices and teachings support sustainable life patterns rather than requiring constant intensity or producing periodic burnout. Avoiding spiritual materialism. Term spiritual materialism describes the tendency to collect spiritual experiences, teachings, and practices as possessions that enhance self-image rather than tools for genuine transformation. The sun's rejection of intellectual pride provides guidance for avoiding this trap. Consistency over novelty. Rather than constantly seeking new techniques or teachings, practitioners benefit from sustained engagement with established practices under qualified guidance. Application over accumulation. Emphasizing practical implementation of basic principles serves spiritual development better than theoretical mastery of complex concepts. Service over achievement. Focusing on how spiritual development enables better service to others prevents practice from becoming self-centered. Community over isolation. Engaging with other sincere practitioners provides accountability and support while preventing the inflation that comes from practicing alone. Humility over expertise. Maintaining beginner's mind regardless of experience level keeps practitioners open to continued learning and growth. The sun's example demonstrates that authentic spiritual development integrates rather than opposes intellectual understanding and devotional surrender. This integration addresses a false dichotomy that appears in many spiritual communities between head and heart approaches to spiritual life. Intellectual devotion. True spiritual intelligence serves devotional purposes rather than ego gratification. This includes study as worship, approaching sacred texts with reverence and gratitude rather than critical analysis designed to find flaws or demonstrate superiority. Teaching as service, sharing spiritual knowledge to benefit others rather than to establish personal authority or expertise. Learning as humility, recognizing that deeper understanding reveals the vastness of what remains unknown rather than providing grounds for pride. Reasoning as prayer, using logical thinking to understand divine purposes rather than to justify personal preferences or avoid spiritual discipline. Devotional intelligence. Similarly, authentic devotion employs rather than abandons intellectual faculties. Discriminating love, distinguishing between genuine spiritual emotion and sentimental attachment that may impede spiritual progress. Intelligent surrender. Understanding what to surrender and how to surrender rather than abandoning all discrimination and responsibility. Practical wisdom. Applying spiritual principles skillfully in daily circumstances rather than retreating into emotional states that avoid worldly engagement. Balanced development. Cultivating all aspects of human nature, intellectual, emotional, physical, and spiritual, in service of divine purposes. Transcendental wisdom. The sun's victory over the lure of the intellect and pride establishes the final pillar for paradise regained. Liberation through knowledge received in pure succession, free from the distortions of human pride. By rejecting unauthorized action, vain philosophy, and intellectual vanity, the sun demonstrates that true wisdom lies in surrender to divine authority rather than assertion of personal understanding. My father often said, "Pride blinds, but humility sees the light." This wisdom encapsulates the essential lesson of this chapter, that spiritual development requires the courage to acknowledge our limitations and seek guidance from sources greater than our individual intelligence. The sun's triumph over the subtlest temptation prepares him for the ultimate test of his identity. His journey, marked by obedience, self-control, and now transcendental wisdom, assures his ascent to the supreme destination while offering a beacon for all seeking liberation from the illusions of the mind. For contemporary practitioners, the sun's example provides practical guidance for maintaining spiritual focus amid the information overload and intellectual chaos that characterize modern culture. By prioritizing authentic transmission over novel interpretation, practical application over theoretical accumulation, and service over self-aggrandizement, sincere seekers can navigate the complexities of spiritual development while avoiding the subtle traps of intellectual pride. Path to paradise regained requires not the abandonment of intelligence but its consecration to divine service. When intellectual faculties serve rather than compete with spiritual surrender, they become powerful instruments for both personal transformation and service to others. This integration of wisdom and devotion, demonstrated perfectly by the sun, remains the golden standard for all authentic spiritual development. Chapter 9. Pinnacle of Perfection. This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting, and it is joyfully performed. Bhagavad Gita 9:2. We arrive now at the culmination of the Son of God's trial in the wilderness. The preceding chapters establish the perfect servant's absolute obedience, his immunity to the lures of passion and greed, and his mastery over the pride of secular knowledge. Satan has exhausted his arsenal of gross physical temptations, military spectacle, and philosophical sophistry. He now faces a final, desperate confrontation in Milton's Book 4, testing the very core of the sun's spiritual identity and faith. This ultimate test serves to illuminate the supreme secret of spiritual life, that true freedom, peace, and liberation are achieved only through complete surrender and pure devotional service. This highest truth is defined in our chapter motto, which encapsulates the entire purpose of the sun's victory. This king of education, devoted service, is the means by which the sun achieves not merely the recovery of a lost garden, but the realization of the paradise within thee, happier far. My father, during a serene morning meditation, once shared, "Son, paradise isn't a place, it's a state within, unlocked by surrender." This chapter, enriched by his wisdom and the Gita's teachings, explores how the sun's final triumph offers a universal blueprint for spiritual perfection, resonating with today's seekers of inner peace. Nature of spiritual testing. Before examining the climactic confrontation, it's essential to understand the progressive nature of spiritual testing that the sun has undergone. Each phase of temptation has addressed increasingly subtle levels of attachment and identification, moving from gross material desires through sophisticated intellectual pride to the ultimate test of spiritual identity itself. This progression mirrors the natural development of spiritual consciousness, where practitioners first learn to regulate obvious material desires, then overcome more sophisticated attachments to knowledge and accomplishment, and finally surrender the most fundamental sense of separate selfhood that underlies all other forms of ego identification. Contemporary spiritual development follows similar patterns. Beginning practitioners often struggle with basic sensory desires, food, entertainment, comfort, security. As practice matures, more refined attachments emerge: desire for spiritual experiences, pride in spiritual knowledge, attachment to spiritual identity, and status within communities. The most advanced testing involves surrendering the ultimate sense of being the doer, controller, or enjoyer of spiritual attainment itself. The Night of Terrors. As the temptations of wealth and logic fail, Satan unleashes his raw, infernal power in a desperate attempt to break the sun through fear and physical torment. Night descends with terrors. Infernal ghosts and hellish furies round environ thee. Some howled, some yelled, some shrieked. The natural world responds to the dark assault. The vexed wilderness, whose tallest pines bowed their stiff necks. Yet, amidst this chaotic supernatural assault, the sun remains perfectly stable. He sat unappalled in calm and sinless peace, conquering material dualities. This scene vividly illustrates the achievement of conquering the material dualities that constantly disturb conditioned consciousness. The ordinary soul is perpetually tossed by pairs of opposites: happiness and distress, honor and dishonor, heat and cold, gain and loss, pleasure and pain. These dualities create the basic psychological instability that underlies most human suffering and prevents sustained spiritual focus. The sun's unflinching endurance, particularly in this trial of fear, demonstrates his eligibility for liberation. The Gita confirms that one who is steady in his determination for the advanced stage of spiritual realization and can equally tolerate the onslaughts of distress and happiness is certainly a person eligible for liberation. In today's world, this mirrors meditators who maintain calm during personal crises, emergency responders who function effectively under extreme stress, or individuals who face life-threatening illness with equanimity. The psychology of fear. Fear represents one of the most primitive and powerful emotions, designed by nature to protect the body from physical harm. However, when consciousness identifies primarily with the temporary physical form rather than the eternal spiritual self, fear becomes a chronic condition that limits both personal development and service capacity. The sun's fearlessness doesn't represent insensitivity or recklessness, but rather perfect confidence in his relationship with the divine. When consciousness is rooted in eternal spiritual identity rather than temporary material circumstances, external threats lose their power to disturb inner peace. This doesn't mean ignoring practical dangers, but rather responding to them from a place of calm wisdom rather than panicked reactivity. Contemporary applications include healthcare workers who serve patients during disease outbreaks, activists who challenge oppressive systems despite personal risk, parents who make difficult decisions for their children's long-term welfare, or individuals who leave comfortable but unfulfilling situations to pursue their authentic calling. In each case, spiritual courage emerges from connection to purposes greater than personal comfort or security. Transcendental consciousness in crisis. The sun's physical and mental stability proves that he is situated in a transcendental state of consciousness, entirely fixed in spiritual awareness. Furthermore, he has completely conquered fear, an essential quality of one born with divine nature. He later dismisses the terrors Satan presented, saying, "Me worse than what thou find'st not, other harm those terrors which thou speak'st of did me none. I never feared they could." This freedom from fear stems from the realized knowledge that he is the eternal servant of the Supreme Controller, and nothing in the material world, whether physical storm or infernal phantasm, can touch the soul. The eternal self is never born and never dies, cannot be cut by weapons, burned by fire, wetted by water, or dried by wind. When consciousness is established in this understanding, external circumstances lose their power to create fundamental disturbance. The sun is operating under superior direction, where all activities done in spiritual consciousness are free from the reactions of pious or impious actions and therefore auspicious. This principle appears in contemporary examples of individuals who face extreme challenges with remarkable serenity: first responders who maintain calm effectiveness during disasters, medical professionals who serve terminal patients with peaceful compassion, or spiritual teachers who continue their service despite persecution or misunderstanding. Having failed to terrify the sun, Satan, desperate and acknowledged as having all his devices bent, performs the ultimate symbolic challenge. He carries the sun to the pinnacle of the temple and demands a display of sensational power, stating the ultimate challenge to his faith and identity. For Son of God to me is yet in doubt. The temptation of false ego. This demand aims to provoke the son into action driven by false ego, the fundamental misidentification of the self with temporary roles, abilities, or achievements. Satan seeks to compel the son to prove his divinity through a self-serving miraculous feat, satisfying the tempter's curiosity and demonstrating independence from the Father's explicit will. Such a feat would be unauthorized action, performed out of pride and the desire for recognition. This temptation appears particularly subtle because it seems to serve a reasonable purpose, demonstrating divine identity to resolve doubt. However, the Son recognizes that authentic spiritual identity doesn't require external validation or spectacular demonstration. True spiritual realization manifests through consistent character and service rather than impressive displays designed to convince skeptics. The psychology of false ego underlies most spiritual distortions. Practitioner who uses spiritual attainments to impress others, the teacher who emphasizes their own realization rather than students' development, or the community leader who exploits spiritual authority for personal advantage all demonstrate how noble activities can serve ignoble purposes when motivated by ego gratification. The subtlety of spiritual pride. The demoniac mentality which the Gita describes thinks, "So much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more. I am the Lord of everything, I am the enjoyer." While this attitude obviously appears in material contexts, it can equally manifest in spiritual environments. "So much spiritual knowledge do I have, and I will gain more. I am the most advanced practitioner, I am the true understander of these teachings." Contemporary spiritual communities frequently struggle with these dynamics. Practitioners may compete over who meditates longer, demonstrates greater scriptural knowledge, receives more recognition from teachers, or achieves more impressive spiritual experiences. Teachers may compete for larger followings, more prestigious positions, or greater influence within spiritual organizations. Even sincere seekers may find themselves attached to their spiritual identity in ways that subtly serve ego gratification rather than authentic surrender. The Son, however, rejects this temptation, standing firm in his identity as the Father's servant. His response, "Tempt not the Lord thy God," reflects his realization that his power is derived from divine authority, not personal pride. This aligns with the Gita's teaching that while the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains, which the Son transcends by focusing on divine will rather than personal validation. The victory of humble submission. The Son's refusal to perform the spectacular feat, trusting instead in the Father's plan, marks his complete conquest of false ego. The text states that one who is not motivated by false ego, whose intelligence is not entangled though he kills these people, he does not kill. This paradoxical teaching indicates that when actions flow from divine will rather than personal motivation, they transcend the ordinary moral categories that apply to ego-driven behavior. His victory lies in his humility, as he leaves the outcome to his due time and providence. My father once said, "Humility is the crown of strength, wear it and you rule the soul." This resonates with leaders who exercise authority through service rather than domination, teachers who inspire through example rather than impressive displays, or practitioners who find strength through surrender rather than assertion. This humility shouldn't be confused with weakness or self-deprecation. The Son demonstrates perfect confidence in his identity and mission while simultaneously acknowledging his dependence on divine will for their fulfillment. This balance between spiritual confidence and humble dependence characterizes mature spiritual realization. Satan's final defeat prompts a heavenly vision, where the Son is ministered to by angels, confirming his divine status while demonstrating the natural result of authentic spiritual surrender. This moment reveals the supreme secret, the path of devoted service as the pinnacle of spiritual life. The essence of devoted service. The Gita defines this secret as the king of education knowledge so pure it gives direct perception of the self through realization. It is the perfection of religion, everlasting and joyfully performed. The son's surrender to the father's will exemplifies this, as he acts without attachment to results, offering everything to divine service. Unlike other forms of knowledge that require extensive preparation, complex techniques, or sophisticated understanding, devoted service is accessible to anyone with sincere intention. A child offering flowers with love, a parent caring for family members with attention to their spiritual welfare, or an elderly person chanting simple prayers can engage in this king of education as fully as scholars who study scriptures for decades. The universal accessibility of devoted service makes it particularly relevant for contemporary practitioners who may feel excluded from traditional spiritual paths due to educational limitations, cultural barriers, or life circumstances that prevent extensive formal practice. The essence lies not in external qualifications but in the quality of consciousness with which activities are performed. The science of divine love. The instruction indicates that one who works in devotion attains the supreme. This involves giving up attachment to work, not the work itself, performed with intelligence for divine satisfaction, a practice called proper renunciation. The Son demonstrates that even in a fallen world, one can align all daily activities with spiritual consciousness, taking divine command as the prime duty of life. This principle appears throughout spiritual traditions under various names: loving service in Christianity, compassionate action in Buddhism, selfless service, seva, in Sikhism, or devoted work, karma yoga, in Hinduism. Each tradition recognizes that the consciousness with which we perform activities matters more than the activities themselves. Contemporary applications include healthcare workers who see their patients as manifestations of the divine deserving reverent care, teachers who view education as sacred service to developing souls, business owners who operate their enterprises as opportunities to serve society's needs, or parents who raise children with conscious attention to supporting their spiritual development alongside material welfare. The transformation of activities. The beauty of devoted service lies in its capacity to transform ordinary activities into spiritual practice without requiring withdrawal from normal responsibilities. The office worker who performs their job with attention to serving customers' genuine needs, the student who studies with gratitude for the opportunity to develop their abilities, or the homemaker who maintains their living space as a sanctuary for family members' well-being all engage in authentic spiritual practice. This transformation occurs through a shift in consciousness rather than change in external activities. The same physical actions that previously served only personal advancement or ego gratification become offerings of love when performed with proper understanding and motivation. This accessibility makes devoted service particularly valuable for people whose life circumstances prevent extensive formal spiritual practices. The Son's final victory secures his position as a pure devotee of the divine. While the universal form of the Supreme may be seen with some devotion mixed with speculation, the personal form of the divine is still more difficult to see, even for exalted beings. The Son's immediate return to his proper state signifies the intimate, direct relationship achieved through unalloyed devotion. Beyond impersonal realization. Many spiritual paths emphasize the impersonal aspect of the divine, the formless, attributeless absolute that underlies all manifestations. While this understanding serves important purposes, particularly in transcending limited material conceptions, it represents only a preliminary stage of spiritual realization. The ultimate goal involves personal relationship with the divine as the source and object of love rather than merely an abstract principle to be understood intellectually. The Son's relationship with the Father exemplifies this personal dimension. His surrender isn't merely philosophical acceptance of cosmic principles but loving response to a divine person who cares for him individually. This relationship provides both the motivation for spiritual practice and its ultimate fulfillment. Contemporary practitioners can cultivate similar personal relationships through prayer, meditation, service, and study approached as communion with a loving divine rather than merely techniques for personal improvement. This shift from utilizing spiritual practices for personal benefit to engaging them as expressions of love fundamentally transforms both the practice experience and its results. The guarantee of divine reciprocation. This relationship is guaranteed to those engaged in pure devotional service, free from the contaminations of previous activities and from mental speculation, who is friendly to every living entity. The divine responds to sincere love with unlimited reciprocation, providing both the guidance needed for spiritual development and the ultimate goal of eternal association. This reciprocation appears in the lives of authentic practitioners as increased clarity about life purpose, growing capacity for selfless service, deeper peace amid challenging circumstances, and gradual transformation of character in the direction of divine qualities. Unlike the forced effort that characterizes much spiritual practice, devoted service generates its own momentum as practitioners discover that serving the divine provides greater satisfaction than any material pleasure. Having successfully overcome temptation, the son returns not with the spoils of war but with the eternal victory secured within his consciousness. The angels sing, affirming that by vanquishing temptation, he has regained lost paradise. The promise of internal perfection. The promise of a fairer paradise is founded now for Adam and his chosen sons, which is happier than Eden, refers to the internal state of spiritual perfection rather than any external garden or location. The goal is the cessation of material identification through realizing one's spiritual identity, a state achieved by those who are happy from within and fixed in the spiritual sanctuary found within the heart. This internal paradise remains accessible regardless of external circumstances. Practitioners may face illness, poverty, social rejection, or other material difficulties while simultaneously experiencing increasing spiritual satisfaction and peace. The source of happiness shifts from dependence on favorable external conditions to connection with the inexhaustible love and joy of the divine. Contemporary examples include individuals who maintain remarkable peace and purpose despite severe physical limitations, prisoners who discover spiritual freedom within confinement, patients who find meaning and joy despite terminal diagnoses, or elderly people who radiate wisdom and contentment despite loss of material capabilities. These examples demonstrate that the essential human happiness doesn't depend on external paradise but on internal connection with the divine. The eternal achievement. The spiritual self is eternal and can never be slain. Unlike material accomplishments that are lost at death, spiritual realization represents permanent achievement that enhances rather than diminishes with time. The son's achievement of inner peace demonstrates that he has successfully controlled desire and anger, thereby entering a transcendental state that is both immediate and eternal. This permanence provides profound comfort for practitioners who may feel discouraged by the slowness of spiritual progress or the apparent insignificance of their daily spiritual practices. Every moment of sincere spiritual effort contributes to eternal development that cannot be destroyed by material circumstances or the passage of time. The Gita assures that even a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear, the fear that life lacks ultimate meaning or purpose. When practitioners understand that their spiritual development continues beyond physical death, and that their loving service creates eternal value, temporary setbacks and material losses lose their power to create despair. The son's triumph provides practical guidance for contemporary spiritual seekers facing the challenges of maintaining spiritual focus while fulfilling material responsibilities in a complex, often chaotic world. The gradual process of surrender. While the son demonstrates perfect surrender from the beginning of his trials, his example provides guidance for the gradual process of surrender that characterizes most spiritual development. Each temptation he overcomes represents a stage in the progressive refinement of consciousness that sincere practitioners can expect to experience. The initial focus on regulating gross material desires gradually gives way to addressing subtler attachments to recognition, understanding, and spiritual achievement. Finally, practitioners learn to surrender the sense of being the doer or controller of their spiritual progress, understanding that authentic advancement comes through divine grace rather than personal effort alone. This understanding prevents both spiritual pride, thinking we have achieved realization through our own power, and spiritual discouragement, thinking our efforts are insufficient to produce meaningful progress. Instead, practitioners learn to do their best while depending on divine assistance for results, creating a sustainable approach that avoids both false ego inflation and hopeless frustration. The social dimension of realization. The son's victory benefits not only himself but all of humanity, demonstrating that authentic spiritual realization naturally serves the welfare of others. His triumph over temptation creates possibilities for others' spiritual advancement, showing that individual spiritual development and collective welfare are intimately connected. Contemporary practitioners who sincerely engage in devoted service often find that their spiritual development enhances their capacity to contribute to family welfare, community improvement, and social justice. As consciousness becomes purified of self-centered motivations, natural compassion and wisdom emerge that benefit everyone they encounter. This social dimension prevents spiritual practice from becoming self-absorbed escapism while ensuring that social engagement remains rooted in spiritual principles rather than mere material activism. The most effective social servants are often those who maintain strong spiritual practice, while the most advanced spiritual practitioners naturally express their realization through loving service to others. The sun's triumph carries particular relevance for contemporary spiritual seekers who live in an age of unprecedented material prosperity yet widespread spiritual confusion and dissatisfaction. The simplicity of the path. Despite the sophisticated philosophical framework we've explored, the actual practice of devoted service remains remarkably simple. It requires no special equipment, extensive education, or unusual life circumstances. Anyone can begin immediately by offering their current activities to the divine with gratitude and the intention to serve rather than merely satisfy personal desires. This simplicity makes the path accessible to people across all educational, cultural, economic, and social backgrounds. A janitor who cleans with attention to creating beautiful, healthy environments for others, a CEO who operates a company as service to society's needs, a student who studies with gratitude for the opportunity to develop their abilities, or a retiree who volunteers time to support community welfare all engage in the same essential practice. While the ultimate goal of devoted service is eternal association with the divine, practitioners typically experience immediate benefits that enhance their daily life experience. These include reduced anxiety. When the burden of achieving specific outcomes shifts from personal effort to divine assistance, chronic worry about results naturally diminishes. Increased energy. Activities performed as expressions of love rather than mere obligations generate enthusiasm and vitality rather than depleting energy reserves. Improved relationships. When others are seen as opportunities for service rather than sources of personal satisfaction, relationships become more harmonious and fulfilling for everyone involved. Greater resilience. When happiness depends on internal spiritual connection rather than external circumstances, temporary setbacks lose their power to create lasting disturbance. Enhanced creativity. When activities serve larger purposes rather than narrow self-interest, creative solutions and innovative approaches emerge more naturally. Deeper meaning. When daily activities connect to eternal purposes, even routine tasks become meaningful and satisfying. The progressive nature of realization. While devoted service can begin immediately, its full development occurs gradually through consistent practice over extended periods. Practitioners should expect a natural progression from external compliance with spiritual principles toward internal transformation that makes spiritual consciousness spontaneous and effortless. Initially, offering activities to the divine may feel artificial or forced, requiring conscious effort to remember spiritual intentions amid material responsibilities. Gradually, this consciousness becomes more natural as practitioners experience the superior satisfaction that comes from serving larger purposes rather than narrow self-interest. Eventually, the distinction between spiritual practice and ordinary activity dissolves as all activities become expressions of love for the divine. This represents the ultimate goal toward which the sun's example points, a state where every moment provides opportunities for spiritual expression and every activity contributes to eternal spiritual development. Conclusion: the eternal victory. The sun's final triumph establishes the ultimate teaching of paradise regained, that the paradise lost through disobedience can be regained through surrender, not to material pleasure or intellectual achievement, but to the supreme source of all existence. This victory is available to every sincere seeker through the practice of devoted service performed with faith, love, and dedication to the welfare of all beings. The knowledge demonstrated by the sun is indeed the king of education, simple enough for anyone to practice yet profound enough to provide complete spiritual fulfillment. By engaging in this practice, contemporary seekers can discover the same paradise within that the sun realized, transforming their daily lives into continuous spiritual celebration while preparing for the ultimate destination of eternal association with the divine. The message of paradise regained through devoted service is both ancient and eternally fresh, both simple and infinitely profound. It offers hope to all who struggle with the limitations of material existence while providing practical guidance for transforming those very limitations into stepping stones toward eternal spiritual realization. In following the sun's example of humble surrender and loving service, every sincere practitioner can recover their own lost paradise and discover the infinite joy that is their spiritual birthright. Chapter 10. The Daily Practice of Devotion. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer or give away, and whatever austerities you perform, do that, O son of Kunti, as an offering to me. Bhagavad Gita 9:27. We have journeyed with the Son of God through his trials, witnessing his perfect obedience, triumph over material temptations, mastery of intellectual pride, and ultimate surrender. His path, illuminated by the example set in Milton's Paradise Regained, offers a blueprint for spiritual liberation. Yet the question arises, how can souls in the present era, entangled in the complexities of material existence, follow this divine model? The answer lies in the daily practice of devotion, particularly through the timeless practice of congregational singing and chanting of the holy name of God, a practice that stands as the most accessible and potent method for practitioners in these times. This chapter, guided by ancient wisdom, reveals how communal chanting transforms the ordinary into the sacred, drawing from the Son's unwavering dedication to the Father's will. The foundation for this practice is beautifully articulated in our chapter motto. This verse underscores that all actions, when performed with devotion and offered to the divine, become acts of spiritual practice. In the context of the Son's journey, his every step, whether resisting temptation or standing firm against fear, was an offering to the Supreme. For souls in the present age, congregational chanting emerges as the practical means to achieve this state, especially in an era where traditional spiritual disciplines have become nearly impossible due to material conditions. The role of congregational chanting. In the current era, often described as an age of strife and hypocrisy, the most effective spiritual practice is the congregational chanting of the holy name. This age is marked by quarrel, short lifespan, and a lack of genuine spiritual understanding. The people of this age are short-lived, very slow in understanding spirituality, and always disturbed by various anxieties, as noted in spiritual commentaries. Traditional methods such as meditation in solitude, severe fasting, or elaborate sacrifices require conditions, peace, time, and purity that are scarce amid the material circumstances of today. Congregational chanting, however, requires only the willingness to chant and hear the name of God, making it uniquely suited for souls navigating these challenging times. The Son's victory over Satan's temptations, as depicted in Paradise Regained Book 4, mirrors this principle. When faced with the night of terrors, he remained unappalled in calm and sinless peace, a state attainable through constant connection with the divine. For practitioners today, congregational chanting offers this connection amidst the turmoil of material life. Across various spiritual traditions, congregational singing has gained significant traction. Vibrant gospel choirs in American churches lift spirits with harmonious praise, creating communities where individuals find strength through shared devotion. In cities like New York, Los Angeles, and even Berlin, curtain events draw hundreds who chant mantras to find inner calm. These gatherings demonstrate how congregational chanting bridges the eternal soul with the transient world, a lesson the Son embodied through his steadfast faith, unaffected by external chaos. Power of communal spiritual practice extends beyond any single tradition. Jewish communities gather for nigyanim, wordless melodies that elevate consciousness through pure sound. Islamic dhikr circles create sacred space through repetitive remembrance of divine names. Buddhist sanghas chant together to purify the mind and heart. Even secular meditation groups have discovered the transformative power of group practice, often incorporating chanting elements from various traditions. Modern neuroscience has begun to validate what spiritual traditions have long understood. Group chanting synchronizes brain waves among participants, creating measurable states of coherence and calm. Research at universities like Harvard and Stanford shows that group singing releases endorphins, reduces stress hormones, and strengthens immune function. When we chant together, our nervous systems literally harmonize, creating a shared field of peace that individual practice alone cannot easily achieve. Why traditional practices fall short? While ancient spiritual practices hold profound value, they are largely impractical for souls in the present age due to the material conditions they face. The Gita notes that there is no possibility of steady meditation for those who eat too much, sleep too much, or work excessively, nor for those who abstain too severely. The average person, burdened by long working hours, family responsibilities, and the constant intrusion of technology, finds it nearly impossible to sit in silent meditation for hours or undertake rigorous fasting. Proliferation of digital devices has fundamentally altered human consciousness. Research indicates that individuals check their phones over 150 times daily, with the average person switching between apps and tasks every 19 seconds when using their devices. This constant fragmentation leaves little room for the deep, sustained focus required by traditional spiritual disciplines. Social media platforms are designed to capture and monetize attention, creating addiction-like patterns that pull consciousness outward rather than inward. Consider the well-meaning individual who begins a meditation practice with sincere intentions but abandons it after a week, overwhelmed by the mental chatter that seems to intensify in silence. Or the person who attempts a multi-day fast only to falter amid a hectic schedule of meetings, errands, and family obligations. The ancient texts explain that such practices, while effective in previous ages characterized by greater purity and simplicity, are not possible in this age due to the degraded nature of current conditions. Yet the sun's trials were not about isolation or extreme austerity but about maintaining devotion amid adversity. His 40-day fast was not an end in itself but preparation for service. His rejection of worldly power came not from hatred of the world but from dedication to a higher purpose. This principle makes congregational chanting uniquely relevant. It requires no elaborate preparation, no withdrawal from society, no extreme physical disciplines. It asks only for the heart's sincere inclination toward the divine. The failure of traditional approaches in modern contexts often stems from their incompatibility with contemporary life structures. A software engineer working 60-hour weeks cannot realistically retreat to a cave for years of meditation. A single parent juggling multiple jobs and childcare cannot maintain the regular schedule and pristine environment that formal meditation requires. But that same parent can sing sacred songs while cooking dinner, and that engineer can join a weekly chanting group, finding in community what individual practice could not provide. The foundation of daily rituals. To integrate congregational chanting into daily life, a foundation of simple rituals is essential, mirroring the sun's disciplined obedience. Spiritual teachers emphasize that one should begin his day by rising early and chanting the holy name, setting a tone of devotion that aligns the soul with the divine. This foundation need not be elaborate. Consistency matters more than duration or complexity. The morning practice might begin with just 5 to 10 minutes of chanting, either with family members or alone, followed by offering food to the divine before eating. These simple acts echo the sun's ritualistic surrender in rejecting material sustenance for spiritual nourishment. Traditional wisdom advises that, by performing the regulative principles, one becomes situated in spiritual consciousness, emphasizing the importance of regularity over intensity. Practical implementation brings these principles to life in contemporary settings. A busy professional might start the day with a 5-minute chant while brewing coffee, using smartphone apps to maintain focus and timing, thus transforming a routine task into a sacred offering. The simple act of dedicating the day's first moments to spiritual practice creates a foundation that influences all subsequent activities. Families can establish meaningful traditions together. Parents might involve children by singing simple praise songs during breakfast, creating a family ritual that fosters spiritual unity while teaching children that devotion can be joyful rather than burdensome. Children often respond enthusiastically to singing, and incorporating spiritual songs into daily routines helps them develop positive associations with spiritual practice from an early age. In workplace environments, adapted mindfulness routines, often drawing from Eastern traditions, include group breathing exercises or brief chants during breaks. Progressive companies have discovered that these practices improve employee well-being and productivity. A teacher might lead a brief centering song with students to create classroom harmony, while healthcare workers increasingly use chanting and singing as therapeutic tools for both patients and caregivers. Even retirees can find new purpose through spiritual practice. A grandmother might establish a morning ritual of offering fruits to the divine before sharing them with neighbors, turning daily acts of kindness into expressions of devotion. Senior centers across the country have begun incorporating singing and chanting into their programming, recognizing the profound benefits for emotional and spiritual well-being. Key principle underlying all these practices is offering, transforming ordinary activities into spiritual service through conscious intention. When we eat with awareness of the divine source of our nourishment, when we work with dedication to serve something greater than personal ambition, when we interact with others recognizing the divine spark within them, every moment becomes an opportunity for spiritual practice. Offering actions to the divine. The essence of living in spiritual consciousness is to offer all actions to the Supreme, as the Son did by aligning his will with the Father's. Ancient wisdom teaches that everything should be done in spiritual consciousness, transforming even mundane tasks into acts of devotion. Congregational chanting facilitates this by infusing daily life with the holy name. Chanting while driving, cooking, or working transforms these activities into spiritual practice. The Son's rejection of bread from stones was an act of offering his hunger to divine providence. Similarly, practitioners can offer their labor by chanting throughout the day, understanding that, by working for the divine, one does not remain indebted to the forces of nature but rather contributes to the universal harmony. Consider the parent who sings simple melodies while preparing meals, turning kitchen chaos into a devotional act that blesses the entire family. The rhythmic nature of cooking, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, kneading bread, naturally aligns with chanting, creating a meditative flow that transforms necessary work into spiritual practice. Children benefit enormously from this atmosphere of devotional service, learning that work can be joyful when performed with the right consciousness. Commuter might hum spiritual tunes during traffic jams, easing frustration through divine remembrance. Instead of road rage, the gridlocked highway becomes an opportunity for extended chanting practice. Many practitioners report that their commute has become their favorite part of the day once they begin using travel time for spiritual practice. Healthcare workers face particular challenges in maintaining spiritual consciousness amid the stress and suffering they witness daily. A nurse might chant softly during breaks in quiet corners of the hospital, offering her care to the divine. Doctors increasingly recognize that their own spiritual well-being directly affects their ability to serve patients effectively. Some hospitals now provide dedicated spaces for prayer and meditation, acknowledging the spiritual dimension of healing. Factory workers and manual laborers can whisper the holy name while operating machinery, sanctifying repetitive tasks through sacred sound. Construction workers have formed informal groups that begin each day with brief prayers or songs, recognizing that their work contributes to society's well-being. Even in the most mechanized environments, the inner practice of chanting can transform drudgery into devotion. This practice aligns with the ancient teaching that, by worship of the Supreme, who is the source of all beings and who is all-pervading, a person can attain perfection through performing his own duties. The analogy of life as a spiritual melody resonates here. Congregational chanting is the tune that harmonizes our actions with the divine will, much like the Son's harmonious obedience and his calm response to Satan's offers. Transformation occurs not through changing our external activities but through changing our consciousness while performing them. A janitor who chants while cleaning sanctifies his work, contributing to the purification of the environment on both physical and spiritual levels. A teacher who offers her lessons to the divine serves not only her students but the greater cause of enlightenment. A businessman who dedicates his commerce to spiritual principles transforms economic activity into ethical service. Overcoming material distractions. Present age presents unprecedented challenges to spiritual focus. Television, social media, and endless digital notifications create what researchers call attention residue, fragments of consciousness scattered across multiple stimuli, making concentrated spiritual practice increasingly difficult. Ancient wisdom warns that attachment to material things is the cause of bondage, leading from desire to anger and delusion, precisely the trap the Son overcame in rejecting worldly glory. Congregational chanting serves as a practical tool to counter these influences, offering a simple yet powerful way to redirect the mind. The beauty of group practice is that it provides external support when individual willpower falters. When surrounded by others chanting, the mind naturally becomes absorbed in the spiritual sound, overriding the habitual patterns of distraction. Modern technology, while often a source of spiritual distraction, can also support practice when used consciously. Practitioners might begin by setting specific boundaries, perhaps limiting social media to 30 minutes daily, and replacing screen time with chanting. A young professional might mute all notifications during a 10-minute morning chanting session, often noticing improved clarity and peace throughout the day. Students report significant benefits from incorporating chanting into study routines. Rather than multitasking with music, social media, and homework simultaneously, they use sacred songs and chants to maintain focus while studying. The rhythmic nature of chanting helps regulate breathing and heart rate, creating optimal conditions for learning and retention. Parents face the particular challenge of modeling healthy technology use for children while managing their own digital habits. Families that establish regular chanting times, perhaps 15 minutes each evening, create sacred space that naturally excludes electronic devices. Children often become enthusiastic participants, finding joy in the communal activity while learning to value silence and focused attention. The workplace presents its own set of challenges. Many professionals feel overwhelmed by constant email, meetings, and deadline pressures. Some companies have begun implementing mindful moments, brief periods when teams gather for breathing exercises or simple chants. These practices, adapted from traditional spiritual disciplines, help reset nervous systems overwhelmed by chronic stress. Spiritual teachers explain that the mind can be controlled by constant engagement in devotional service, and congregational chanting practiced regularly gradually weakens the grip of material desires. Key lies in understanding that we are not fighting against distraction but rather cultivating attraction to something higher. When the heart becomes absorbed in divine love through chanting, material entertainments naturally lose their appeal. The role of discipline. Achieving a life of devotion requires both personal discipline and divine grace, a balance the Son exemplified throughout his trials. Spiritual wisdom emphasizes that one should strictly follow the principles of devotional service, such as chanting regularly, while also relying on divine mercy, which delivers one who fully surrenders. The Son's victory over temptation was not merely through his own strength but through the Father's guidance, reflected in the angel's ministration after his trials. For practitioners, discipline in congregational chanting might mean committing to attend weekly gatherings or setting aside daily time for family chanting, gradually building sustainable habits amid material responsibilities. The discipline aspect involves showing up consistently, even when the mind resists or external circumstances seem unfavorable. A teacher might use lunch breaks for chanting, offering the day's lessons to the divine while preparing for afternoon classes. This simple practice transforms the workday from mere employment into spiritual service. A retiree might join a local group for weekly sessions, finding not only spiritual nourishment but also community connection that enriches golden years. Single parents face particular challenges in maintaining spiritual practices while managing overwhelming responsibilities. Yet many discover that chanting while rocking children to sleep, singing spiritual songs during car rides, or humming sacred tunes while doing household chores actually enhances their parenting effectiveness. Peace that comes from spiritual practice benefits the entire family. Grace manifests when sincere effort meets divine response. Ancient texts promise, "To those who are constantly devoted and who worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me." My father often said, "Sing with sincerity and the doors of the heart will open." It's the simplicity of this age that makes such practice so effective. This reflects the accessibility of congregational chanting compared to the rigorous disciplines of previous eras, which demanded years of seclusion and extreme austerity. First responders, police officers, firefighters, paramedics, increasingly recognize the value of spiritual practices in managing traumatic stress. Some departments now include chaplains who facilitate group chanting or singing sessions, providing officers and their families with tools for emotional regulation and spiritual renewal. These practices help process difficult experiences while maintaining the clarity and compassion necessary for public service. The interplay between effort and grace becomes particularly evident in group settings. Individual practitioners often struggle with consistency or depth in personal practice, but when gathered with others who share similar intentions, the combined energy creates a field that supports everyone's advancement. Regular participants frequently report that attending group chanting sessions provides spiritual nourishment that sustains them throughout the week. Healthcare workers, facing life and death decisions daily, find that brief chanting sessions before shifts help center their consciousness and connect with the healing power they hope to channel. Veterans dealing with PTSD discover that group singing provides emotional release and community support that individual therapy alone cannot always provide. Teachers use singing to create classroom atmospheres that support both learning and character development. Practical exercises. To integrate congregational chanting into daily life, consider these practical approaches, rooted in traditional wisdom and the sun's example of consistent devotion. Morning foundation. Begin with 5 to 10 minutes of chanting upon waking, ideally with family members or household companions. This might involve simple repetition of sacred names or phrases such as Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare, Rama, Rama Rama, Hare, or other traditional invocations appropriate to one's spiritual path. Key is consistency rather than duration. Better to chant briefly each day than extensively once weekly. Meal blessing. Before eating, chant briefly over food, perhaps 108 repetitions of a sacred name or phrase, dedicating the meal to the divine. This practice transforms eating from mere consumption into spiritual communion. Families can develop their own traditions, perhaps taking turns leading the blessing or choosing different chants for different days of the week. Children often enjoy counting the repetitions or learning the melodies associated with meal blessings. Travel transformation. Use commuting time for spiritual practice by humming or singing softly during car rides, train journeys, or walks. This turns necessary travel into devotional pilgrimage. Public transportation provides excellent opportunities for silent repetition of sacred names, transforming potentially stressful commutes into periods of spiritual renewal. Many practitioners find that their travel time becomes the most peaceful part of their day. Workplace sanctuary. Utilize 10 to 15-minute breaks for brief chanting sessions, either alone or with sympathetic colleagues. This practice offers spiritual refreshment that often proves more energizing than caffeine. Some workplaces have established meditation or quiet rooms where employees can engage in personal spiritual practices. Healthcare facilities, educational institutions, and progressive corporations increasingly recognize the value of supporting employees' spiritual well-being. Evening reflection. Conclude each day with 5 to 10 minutes of chanting while reflecting on actions offered to the divine, similar to the sun's nightly peace after completing his trials. This practice helps process the day's experiences while reinforcing the intention to serve something greater than personal ambition. Families might gather after dinner for brief chanting sessions, sharing gratitude for the day's blessings while setting positive intentions for the following day. Community connection. Seek out local groups that practice congregational chanting, whether in traditional religious settings or contemporary spiritual communities. Many cities now host regular curtain events, gospel singing circles, or interfaith chanting gatherings. These communities provide support, instruction, and the powerful experience of unified spiritual practice that individual effort alone cannot replicate. Service integration. Combine chanting with service activities, singing while preparing food for others, chanting during volunteer work, or incorporating sacred songs into community service projects. This approach follows the sun's example of offering all activities to divine service while maintaining spiritual consciousness throughout practical engagement with the world's needs. These practices, implemented consistently, create a foundation that gradually transforms ordinary consciousness into spiritual awareness. Key lies not in perfect execution but in sincere effort sustained over time. The spirit of group practice. Modern research validates what spiritual traditions have long understood about the power of group chanting and singing. Neuroscientists have discovered that synchronized vocal activities create measurable changes in brain chemistry, releasing endorphins that promote well-being while reducing stress hormones like cortisol. Group singing synchronizes breathing patterns among participants, creating a shared physiological state that supports emotional harmony and mental clarity. Studies at major universities show that regular participants in group singing report improved immune function, better sleep patterns, and enhanced emotional resilience. The vagus nerve, which regulates the body's rest and restore responses, is stimulated through sustained vocal activity, particularly when combined with the deep breathing that chanting naturally encourages. But the benefits extend far beyond individual physiology. Group chanting creates what researchers call collective effervescence, a shared emotional state that transcends individual consciousness. Participants often report feeling connected not only to each other but to something greater than themselves, experiencing what spiritual traditions have always recognized as communion with the divine. The Son's example demonstrates this principle. His strength came not from isolation but from conscious connection with the Father's will. Similarly, practitioners find that group chanting provides access to spiritual resources that individual practice alone cannot easily generate. Collective intention and shared devotion create a field of consciousness that supports everyone's spiritual development. This understanding helps explain why congregational chanting has emerged as the recommended practice for the present age. Traditional disciplines that required individual mastery of complex techniques are less accessible to most people, but group practice harnesses collective energy to carry participants beyond their individual limitations. Building sustainable community. The most successful approaches to congregational chanting recognize that sustainable practice requires community support. Individual enthusiasm, however sincere, often falters without the encouragement and accountability that group participation provides. This is why spiritual traditions have always emphasized the importance of association with like-minded practitioners. Building such a community begins with small steps. A family that establishes regular chanting times creates the foundation for lifelong spiritual practice. Children who grow up with sacred songs and chants develop positive associations with spiritual life that often persist into adulthood, even if they explore different paths or take breaks from formal practice. Workplace communities can develop around shared spiritual interests. Employees who discover common ground in spiritual seeking often form informal groups that meet during lunch hours or after work. These gatherings provide mutual support while creating positive influence in professional environments often dominated by material concerns. Neighborhood groups emerge organically when individuals committed to spiritual practice reach out to others with similar interests. Many successful chanting communities began with just 2 or 3 people meeting weekly in someone's living room. As word spreads and the benefits become evident, such groups often grow into substantial communities that provide spiritual nourishment for dozens or even hundreds of participants. The key to building lasting community lies in maintaining focus on the essential purpose, spiritual development through devotional practice, while remaining welcoming to newcomers and flexible about specific forms and traditions. The most successful groups emphasize sincerity of intention over doctrinal conformity, creating space for authentic spiritual seeking while maintaining the disciplined practice that produces genuine transformation. The path forward. The Son's journey through temptation and triumph teaches that devotion transcends material limitations, becoming accessible to all souls through the simple yet profound practice of congregational chanting. This method, particularly suited for the present age, allows practitioners to offer every action to the divine while overcoming the distractions and demands of material life. Traditional wisdom, reflected perfectly in the Son's example, reveals congregational chanting as both spiritual discipline and divine gift. As we chant together, we walk the path he blazed, finding paradise not in some distant garden but within our hearts, transformed through shared devotion and mutual support. The simplicity of this practice, contrasted with the often unattainable rigors of ancient disciplines, offers genuine hope for spiritual seekers in contemporary times. By gathering regularly to chant, sing, and offer our voices in praise of the divine, we create communities of practice that support individual development while contributing to the collective spiritual awakening our troubled world desperately needs. The Son's perfect obedience, demonstrated through his trials in the wilderness, shows us that true liberation comes not from external circumstances but from internal alignment with divine will. Congregational chanting provides the most accessible means for achieving this alignment, inviting all sincere souls to participate in the ancient yet ever-new practice of offering everything to the Supreme through the power of sacred sound. In this way, the promise of paradise regained becomes not merely a theological concept but a living reality, achievable through the daily practice of devotion that transforms ordinary consciousness into spiritual awareness, individual struggle into communal support, and material existence into divine service. Chapter 11. Serving Together in Divine Harmony. The humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with equal vision a learned and gentle person, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog-eater. Bhagavad Gita 5:18. The journey of the Son of God, as chronicled through his trials in Milton's Paradise Regained, has revealed a path of spiritual liberation marked by obedience, resistance to temptation, mastery over pride, and ultimate surrender. In Chapter 10, we explored how congregational chanting serves as the daily practice that aligns souls with the divine, offering a practical remedy for the challenges of the present age. Yet this path is not meant to be walked alone. The Son's eventual ministration by angels signifies the power of divine community, a principle that extends to all practitioners. This chapter delves into the community of devotion, where congregational chanting fosters unity, service, and collective spiritual growth. Our guiding verse reflects the vision of equality and humility that defines authentic spiritual community. True knowledge enables one to see all living beings as equal parts of the Supreme, transcending material distinctions of birth, education, wealth, or social position. The Son's journey, culminating in his harmonious return to divine favor, mirrors this ideal of inclusive spiritual fellowship. For souls in the present era, congregational chanting within a supportive community becomes the means to realize this unity, especially when traditional solitary practices, such as severe penance or prolonged meditation, prove unattainable amid material distractions. The power of collective spiritual practice transcends individual limitations, creating a field of consciousness that elevates all participants while serving the broader needs of society. Collective spiritual practice. In our current age, characterized by increasing isolation, digital distraction, and social fragmentation, the congregational chanting of the holy name stands as a uniquely potent spiritual practice. This age is marked by quarrel, shortened attention spans, and widespread spiritual confusion, conditions that render individual austerities like solitary meditation or elaborate rituals nearly impossible for most people. The constant demands of contemporary life, demanding careers, family obligations, financial pressures, and technological overwhelm, leave little room for the sustained focus that traditional disciplines require. Yet collective chanting harnesses a different principle entirely. Rather than depending solely on individual willpower or perfect conditions, group practice creates a supportive field that carries participants beyond their personal limitations. This phenomenon has been recognized by spiritual traditions worldwide and is now being validated by modern scientific research. The Son's strength during his trials derived not from isolation but from his conscious alignment with the Father's will, a connection that was ultimately reinforced by the angel's presence after his victory. This divine community represents the archetypal pattern that human spiritual communities can aspire to emulate. When practitioners gather with sincere intention to chant together, they create a collective energy that transcends what any individual could achieve alone. Consider the transformation that occurs in a gospel church when hundreds of voices unite in praise. Individual worshipers who might feel disconnected or spiritually dry during private prayer find themselves lifted into ecstatic communion with the divine through communal singing. The collective energy becomes greater than the sum of its parts, creating an experience of transcendence that validates faith and renews spiritual commitment. Similarly, in Hindu traditions, massive gatherings like the Kumbh Mela demonstrate the power of collective spiritual practice. Millions of pilgrims chant together, creating an atmosphere so charged with devotional energy that participants often report profound spiritual experiences that transform their lives permanently. The individual seeker, who might struggle with distraction and doubt in solitary practice, becomes absorbed in a vast ocean of collective consciousness focused on the divine. Buddhist communities have long recognized this principle through their emphasis on the Sangha, or spiritual community, as one of the three jewels alongside the Buddha and the Dharma. Group chanting sessions in Buddhist temples create resonant fields that support meditation and contemplation in ways that isolated practice often cannot match. Collective recitation of mantras or sacred texts generates shared states of calm and insight that benefit all participants while strengthening the community bonds that support sustained practice. Even secular applications of this principle have emerged in recent decades. Group singing has been recognized by healthcare providers as a powerful therapeutic modality, with choirs being prescribed for everything from depression and anxiety to Parkinson's disease and dementia. Research shows that when people sing together, their breathing, heart rates, and brainwaves synchronize, creating measurable states of physiological coherence that support both mental and physical health. The science of community chanting. Modern neuroscience has begun to unveil the mechanisms behind the transformative power of group chanting. When people sing or chant together, several remarkable phenomena occur simultaneously. Neural synchronization. Brain imaging studies show that group singing literally synchronizes neural activity among participants. The rhythmic nature of chanting entrains brainwaves, creating shared states of consciousness that transcend individual mental patterns. This synchronization extends beyond the duration of the practice, with participants maintaining heightened states of coherence and well-being for hours or even days afterward. Biochemical changes. Group chanting triggers the release of powerful neurochemicals including endorphins, oxytocin, and dopamine. Endorphins create natural states of euphoria and pain relief, while oxytocin promotes bonding and trust among participants. Dopamine enhances motivation and reinforces the behavior, making practitioners naturally drawn to return to group sessions. Immune system enhancement. Regular participation in group singing has been shown to boost immune function, with participants showing increased levels of immunoglobulin A and other protective antibodies. This suggests that community chanting provides not just spiritual but also physical benefits that support overall health and longevity. Stress reduction. Cortisol levels drop significantly during and after group chanting sessions, indicating profound reductions in stress and anxiety. Parasympathetic nervous system is activated, promoting rest and restoration while counteracting the chronic fight-or-flight responses that characterize modern life. Social connection. Perhaps most importantly for spiritual development, group chanting creates genuine social bonds that extend far beyond the practice sessions themselves. Participants report feeling more connected not just to each other but to their communities and to life itself. These scientific findings validate what spiritual traditions have taught for millennia, that collective spiritual practice accesses dimensions of healing and transformation that individual effort alone cannot reach. The Son's experience of angelic ministry after his trials represents this principle in its most exalted form, showing how alignment with divine will naturally attract spiritual support and community. Serving others. One of the most beautiful aspects of authentic spiritual community is how it naturally generates service to others. When hearts are open through collective chanting, compassion flows spontaneously toward those in need. This service orientation reflects the Son's selfless dedication to the Father's plan and his ultimate mission to serve all humanity. Unlike solitary spiritual practices that can sometimes become self-absorbed or escapist, community chanting creates an outward-flowing energy that seeks expression through practical service. Participants often report that their group practice sessions leave them more sensitive to others' needs and more motivated to act on behalf of those who are suffering. This dynamic manifests in countless ways across different communities. A neighborhood chanting group might organize regular visits to local nursing homes, bringing the joy of sacred music to elderly residents who are often isolated from spiritual community. The residents benefit not just from the music but from the obvious love and care that the chanters bring, while the chanters themselves experience the deep satisfaction of serving others through their practice. Church communities that emphasize congregational singing often find themselves naturally drawn to social justice work and community service. The experience of unity in worship breaks down the barriers of selfishness and indifference that prevent people from responding to others' needs. Many of the most effective charitable organizations in America grew out of faith communities that placed strong emphasis on collective worship and singing. Workplace communities that incorporate chanting or singing into their routine often develop stronger cultures of mutual support and cooperation. Employees who sing together during breaks report better relationships with colleagues, increased job satisfaction, and greater willingness to help each other during challenging periods. The shared spiritual practice creates bonds that transcend professional hierarchies and competitive dynamics. Healthcare workers who practice group chanting often find that their patient care improves significantly. Calm and compassion cultivated through collective practice naturally extends to their professional interactions, creating healing environments that benefit everyone involved. Some hospitals have begun incorporating group singing into their employee wellness programs, recognizing that supporting healthcare workers' spiritual well-being directly improves patient outcomes. Educational communities that include group singing or chanting often see improvements not just in academic performance but in social cohesion and mutual respect among students. The experience of creating harmony together teaches cooperation and empathy in ways that individual study cannot replicate. Teachers who lead group chanting with their students report fewer behavioral problems and more positive classroom atmospheres. Key insight is that authentic spiritual practice naturally generates love and service. When people experience their fundamental unity through shared devotion, artificial divisions of race, class, education, or social status begin to dissolve. This unity consciousness then expresses itself through practical acts of kindness and support that strengthen both the spiritual community and the broader society. Unity beyond material divisions. One of the most profound gifts of congregational chanting is its ability to transcend the material divisions that fragment contemporary society. In our current cultural climate, people are increasingly segregated by economic status, educational background, political affiliation, racial identity, and numerous other categories. These divisions create isolation and conflict that prevent both individual spiritual development and collective social harmony. Authentic spiritual community offers a different vision. When people gather with sincere intention to honor the divine through chanting, the external differences that usually define social interaction become secondary to the shared spiritual purpose. A wealthy executive and a struggling single parent can stand side by side, their voices blending in perfect harmony as they offer praise to the same supreme source. This unity is not merely theoretical but practically observable in thriving spiritual communities worldwide. Churches that emphasize congregational singing often display remarkable diversity, with members from different backgrounds finding common ground in shared devotion. The music creates a language that transcends verbal communication, allowing hearts to connect directly without the mediation of social categories. Interfaith chanting events have become increasingly popular in diverse urban areas, drawing participants from different religious traditions who discover that their deepest spiritual aspirations are remarkably similar. A Hindu chanting Sanskrit mantras, a Christian singing gospel hymns, a Muslim reciting Daikar, and a Buddhist chanting sutras all experience the same fundamental movement of consciousness toward the divine. These gatherings demonstrate that authentic spirituality is universal, transcending the doctrinal differences that often divide religious communities. The inclusivity of group chanting extends beyond religious boundaries to encompass all sincere seekers, regardless of their background or level of spiritual development. Unlike traditional practices that might require extensive preparation, scholarly training, or specific religious affiliation, chanting requires only the willingness to participate with an open heart. This accessibility makes it particularly suitable for contemporary pluralistic societies where spiritual seekers come from diverse backgrounds and traditions. Youth communities that incorporate group chanting often see remarkable improvements in social dynamics. Young people who might otherwise be divided by cliques, academic performance, or social status find common ground in shared musical expression. The experience of creating harmony together breaks down the defensive barriers that adolescents typically maintain, fostering genuine friendship and mutual support. Senior communities that practice group singing often experience reduced loneliness and depression while building networks of care and companionship. Elderly participants who might otherwise feel isolated or forgotten discover renewed purpose through collective worship, while also providing wisdom and stability that benefits younger participants. The vision of spiritual equality expressed in our chapter motto becomes lived reality in authentic chanting communities. Participants learn to see beyond external appearances to recognize the divine spark present in every individual. This recognition transforms not only community dynamics but also participants' relationships with everyone they encounter in daily life. Building spiritual communities. Creating lasting communities centered on congregational chanting requires both vision and practical wisdom. The enthusiasm that initially draws people together must be sustained through the inevitable challenges that arise in any group endeavor. Learning from both successful communities and common pitfalls can help new groups establish strong foundations for long-term growth and service. Starting small and growing organically. The most successful spiritual communities often begin with just a few committed individuals who share a genuine desire for collective practice. These founding members establish regular meeting times, consistent practices, and welcoming atmospheres that naturally attract others who are seeking similar experiences. A family that begins chanting together daily might eventually invite neighbors to join weekly sessions. A workplace group that starts with 3 or 4 people during lunch breaks might grow to include dozens of participants as word spreads about the benefits. Maintaining focus on the essential. Thriving communities keep their primary purpose clear while remaining flexible about secondary details. The essential element is sincere engagement in collective spiritual practice. The specific songs, chants, or traditions can be adapted to serve the community's needs and preferences. Groups that become overly rigid about particular forms or traditions often discourage newcomers, while groups that lose focus on spiritual practice tend to devolve into purely social gatherings. Developing leadership and shared responsibility. Sustainable communities cultivate leadership from within rather than depending entirely on a single individual or outside authority. Participants are encouraged to take turns leading chants, organizing gatherings, coordinating service projects, and handling practical details. This distributed leadership model prevents burnout while helping all members develop confidence in their ability to contribute to the community's well-being. Creating inclusive and welcoming atmospheres. The most successful chanting communities work consciously to welcome newcomers while honoring the commitment of long-term members. Regular participants mentor newcomers, helping them learn the chants and understand the community's values. Gatherings include time for socializing and relationship building alongside the formal practice sessions, recognizing that authentic spiritual community encompasses the full range of human connection and support. Balancing structure and spontaneity. Effective communities maintain enough structure to ensure consistent, quality experiences while leaving room for spontaneous expressions of devotion and community needs. Regular meeting times and established practices provide stability, while flexibility allows for special events, responses to community crises, and adaptation to changing circumstances. Connecting with broader networks. Isolated communities often struggle to maintain momentum over time, while those connected to broader networks of like-minded practitioners benefit from shared resources, visiting teachers, festival celebrations, and mutual support during challenging periods. Local chanting groups might connect with regional or national organizations that provide guidance, materials, and opportunities for enlarged gatherings. Challenges in community practice. Every spiritual community faces predictable challenges that can either strengthen or fragment the group, depending on how they are addressed. Understanding these common patterns helps communities prepare appropriate responses while maintaining focus on their spiritual purpose. Managing personality conflicts. When people spend significant time together, personality differences and interpersonal conflicts inevitably arise. Successful communities develop healthy processes for addressing disagreements while keeping them in perspective relative to the shared spiritual purpose. Regular group chanting often provides a natural healing mechanism, as the practice itself tends to dissolve false ego-driven conflicts and remind participants of their deeper unity. Dealing with different levels of commitment. Community members naturally have varying levels of availability, interest, and dedication to spiritual practice. Rather than creating rigid expectations that exclude busy parents, traveling professionals, or others with legitimate constraints, thriving communities find ways to include everyone according to their current capacity while maintaining the core practices that define the group's identity. Handling doctrinal or theological differences. Participants often arrive with different religious backgrounds, spiritual beliefs, or theological opinions that can create tension if not addressed skillfully. The most successful chanting communities emphasize shared practice over shared beliefs, allowing doctrinal diversity while maintaining focus on the collective spiritual experience that transcends intellectual differences. Preventing burnout among organizers. The enthusiasm that motivates people to start spiritual communities can lead to overcommitment and eventual burnout if not managed carefully. Sustainable communities distribute organizational responsibilities among multiple people, set reasonable boundaries around time and energy commitments, and regularly assess whether the community structure is serving everyone's well-being. Maintaining spiritual focus. As communities grow and develop social bonds, there is often pressure to expand activities beyond the core spiritual practice. While fellowship and service naturally emerge from authentic spiritual community, groups that lose focus on their primary purpose of collective chanting often find their spiritual power diminished. Regular evaluation of activities and priorities helps communities maintain their essential identity. Adapting to changing circumstances. Life circumstances change, members move away, new people join with different needs, and external conditions evolve. Resilient communities develop cultures of adaptability that allow them to modify their practices and structures while preserving their essential spiritual purpose. The power of collective devotion. One of the most remarkable aspects of an authentic spiritual community is its capacity to facilitate healing on multiple levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. This healing power emerges naturally from the combination of collective practice, mutual support, and shared devotion that characterizes thriving chanting communities. Emotional healing. Group chanting provides a safe container for processing difficult emotions and traumatic experiences. The supportive presence of fellow practitioners, combined with the elevating power of sacred sound, helps individuals release emotional burdens that might otherwise remain trapped and destructive. Many participants report that their group practice sessions have helped them heal from grief, depression, anxiety, and relationship wounds in ways that individual therapy alone could not achieve. Physical healing. While spiritual communities should never replace professional medical care, many participants in group chanting report improvements in physical health conditions ranging from chronic pain to autoimmune disorders. The stress reduction, immune system enhancement, and nervous system regulation that result from regular group practice create optimal conditions for the body's natural healing mechanisms. Mental healing. The repetitive, meditative nature of group chanting helps quiet the constant mental chatter that characterizes anxiety and depression while fostering states of calm clarity that support better decision-making and emotional regulation. Participants often find that their group practice helps them break cycles of negative thinking and develop more positive, spiritually oriented mental habits. Social healing. For people who have experienced rejection, abandonment, or social trauma, an authentic spiritual community provides experiences of unconditional acceptance and belonging that can heal deep wounds. Practice of chanting together creates bonds that are less conditional and more stable than typical social relationships, offering participants a taste of divine love expressed through human community. Spiritual healing. Perhaps most importantly, group chanting facilitates the healing of the fundamental spiritual wound of separation from the divine. Through collective practice, individuals experience states of unity consciousness that remind them of their true nature as spiritual beings temporarily embodied in material forms. This recognition provides the foundation for all other forms of healing while orienting life toward its ultimate purpose. Natural expression of unity. When spiritual communities mature beyond the initial focus on members' personal spiritual development, they naturally begin expressing their unity consciousness through service to the broader society. This outward flow of compassion and practical assistance represents the fulfillment of the spiritual community rather than a distraction from it. Direct service to those in need. Many chanting communities organize regular service projects that address immediate needs in their local areas. These might include serving meals at homeless shelters, visiting isolated elderly people, providing childcare for single parents, or offering practical assistance to families experiencing crisis. Key insight is that these service activities often include elements of chanting or singing, recognizing that both those serving and those being served benefit from the spiritual practice. Environmental stewardship. Spiritual communities that experience unity with all life naturally develop concern for environmental protection and restoration. Group chanting in natural settings, parks, beaches, forests, often leads to conservation efforts and educational programs that help others develop similar appreciation for the natural world as a manifestation of divine creativity. Cultural preservation and innovation. Communities that practice traditional chanting forms often become centers for preserving ancient musical and spiritual traditions while also fostering contemporary expressions that make these practices accessible to modern audiences. This cultural work serves both the spiritual community and the broader society by maintaining connections to humanity's spiritual heritage. Peace and reconciliation work. The experience of transcending divisions through shared spiritual practice often motivates communities to work for peace and reconciliation in contexts of social conflict. Groups that have learned to harmonize differences through chanting naturally become resources for helping others resolve conflicts and build bridges across cultural, racial, or ideological divides. Educational and mentoring programs. Mature spiritual communities often develop programs that share their knowledge and experience with others who are seeking to establish similar groups or deepen their own spiritual practice. This might include workshops on group chanting techniques, retreats for spiritual seekers, or mentoring programs that support new community leaders. The vision of divine society. The ultimate aspiration of spiritual community extends beyond the boundaries of any particular group to encompass a vision of society organized around spiritual principles rather than material competition. This vision, glimpsed in moments of profound group unity during collective chanting, provides inspiration and guidance for the gradual transformation of human civilization. In such a society, the artificial divisions that currently fragment humanity would be recognized as illusions that prevent both individual fulfillment and collective harmony. Economic systems would prioritize the well-being of all beings rather than the accumulation of wealth by a few. Educational systems would cultivate wisdom and character alongside technical knowledge. Political systems would seek to serve the common good rather than advance partisan interests. This transformation would not occur through external revolution but through the gradual spiritual awakening of individuals who then naturally create more harmonious relationships, families, communities, and institutions. Group chanting serves as both a means for individual spiritual development and a model for the cooperation and mutual support that would characterize an enlightened society. The sun's journey from temptation through triumph to divine communion represents this archetypal pattern of spiritual transformation, both for individuals and for human civilization as a whole. His example shows that true victory comes not through defeating others but through transcending the illusion of separation that creates conflict. His ministry by angels represents the divine support that becomes available when consciousness is aligned with universal principles of love and service. Practical guidelines. For those inspired to begin or strengthen spiritual communities centered on congregational chanting, several practical guidelines can help ensure success while avoiding common pitfalls. Begin with personal practice. Before attempting to lead others, individuals should establish their own consistent daily practice of chanting and spiritual study. Authentic leadership in spiritual matters flows from genuine personal transformation rather than mere intellectual understanding or organizational skill. Start small and focus on quality. It is better to have 3 people who are genuinely committed to regular practice than 30 people who attend sporadically with divided attention. Small groups that maintain consistent, sincere practice naturally attract others who are seeking similar experiences. Emphasize practice over performance. While musical beauty naturally emerges from sincere group chanting, communities that focus primarily on performance quality often lose the spiritual essence that makes the practice transformative. The goal is collective spiritual upliftment rather than entertainment or artistic achievement. Create welcoming but focused atmospheres. Newcomers should feel immediately welcome and included, while regular participants should experience deepening spiritual connection through sustained practice. This balance requires conscious attention to both hospitality and spiritual discipline. Develop sustainable rhythms. Weekly gatherings seem to work better than daily meetings for most communities, providing regular connection without overwhelming participants' other responsibilities. Special events, retreats, and service projects can supplement regular gatherings without replacing them. Connect chanting with service. Communities that include service components alongside their chanting practice often develop stronger bonds and more meaningful sense of purpose than groups focused solely on personal spiritual development. Seek guidance from experienced practitioners. Connecting with individuals or organizations that have successfully developed similar communities can provide invaluable guidance while helping new groups avoid reinventing solutions to common challenges. Conclusion: the sun's journey through temptation to triumph, supported ultimately by divine community, offers a template for individual spiritual development within the context of supportive fellowship. His example demonstrates that true victory comes through personal alignment with divine will rather than assertion of false ego, and that such individual dedication naturally inspires others who witness authentic spiritual commitment. For contemporary spiritual seekers, congregational chanting provides the most accessible means for maintaining personal spiritual practice while drawing inspiration from fellow practitioners. Through regular participation in an authentic spiritual community, individuals find encouragement for their own spiritual work while experiencing the joy that comes from supporting others on similar paths. Each person must do their own spiritual work. No community can transform us without our individual effort, commitment, and surrender. However, the support and inspiration we find in genuine spiritual fellowship can provide the encouragement needed to sustain personal practice through difficult periods and to deepen our own relationship with the divine. The vision of paradise regained thus becomes not merely a future hope but a present possibility for each sincere practitioner. As individuals within communities commit to their own spiritual development, their personal transformation naturally radiates outward, inspiring family members, friends, and colleagues to consider their own spiritual needs and possibilities. The simplicity of congregational chanting makes personal spiritual practice accessible to people of all backgrounds and circumstances. No special qualifications, extensive training, or elaborate facilities are required. Only sincere hearts willing to join their voices in praise of the divine while committing to their individual spiritual development. Through this ancient yet eternally relevant practice, authentic spiritual community becomes a source of ongoing inspiration and support for each person's unique journey toward divine realization. Final invitation. In Paradise Revealed, Volume 2, we successfully navigated the spiritual combat detailed in Milton's Paradise Regained, following the one greater man to achieve liberation through firm obedience fully tried through all temptation. We conquered the gross lures of desire and the subtle traps of intellectual pride, securing the internal state of spiritual perfection, the paradise within thee, happier far. This internal victory ensures the cessation of material identification and provides freedom from fear. But the path of redemption does not end with inner peace. The achievement of transcendental consciousness is the king of education. What lies beyond paradise? Is inner perfection truly the final destination, or does something infinitely greater await? Volume 3 reveals the ultimate truth that Volume 2 prepared you for, the discovery of our eternal spiritual destination. Here we explore the profound difference between abstract liberation and the loving fulfillment found in divine connection. True realization of the Supreme involves more than transcending the material world or achieving spiritual consciousness. The ultimate goal is not an abstract principle but a personal relationship with the divine as the source and object of love. The Son's perfect submission was not merely obedience, it was a loving response to divine person who cares for him individually. Beyond Paradise invites you into the final phase of realization, to renew your personal relationship with the Supreme Person and discover the pinnacle of devoted service. The knowledge revealed in this Volume 3 is everlasting and joyfully performed. Doesn't simply inform, it transforms. Doesn't merely teach, it awakens. Are you ready to discover the ultimate fulfillment that transcends even internal mastery? The journey through paradise within was the preparation. Now comes the destination. Join us in Beyond Paradise and embrace the highest spiritual reality, the science of divine love. Your transformation awaits.